These are the same ones that were emailed, right? Okay, so I've already reviewed those. Thank you. Thank you. Are you really? When you fly it out? As soon as you're done here.
We're good.
Send it tomorrow morning or night?
I was just looking, I'm like, why are the
Nice. Yeah.
I guess they didn't want you guys to have to lower your
You know, just sit by you guys.
Awesome.
They wanted to separate it.
Good for you.
We were going to have difference of opinion tonight.
I know.
Uh-oh. That's not a good sign.
Look, Lynn.
It's loading up on caffeine.
I would love to get to a point soon. I like to have we have two parts of our agenda: is consent and then discussion. And subdivisions always have to. It's okay.
Well, is anybody here to talk to this? Let's go back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know. Police early, which probably makes it more about staff side.
So,
She's supposed to start,
Yeah, that was sketchy.
so we'll see how she does. She struggles with anxiety like so bad, but I think she'll have fun.
so it was just way too rough.
What grade is yours?
So I agree.
First grade.
I think there will be items you could do that.
She's doing great.
Got everybody? Testing, we good? I'd like to welcome everyone out to the Planning Commission meeting for September 1st, 2022. We'll start off with item 3.1, which is the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be offered by Josh Haley, if you just want to come up. Yep.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Josh. We do have not quite a full quorum today, but we do have the majority of our planning commission here today. With that being said, are there any conflicts of interest with any items on the agenda today on the planning commission? No. Seeing none, we'll move on to our administrative items. We do have a couple of items on for public hearings, so I'm just going to read that now of how that works, and then we'll start the meeting. Public comment policy and procedure. The purpose of public comment is to allow citizens to address items on the agenda. Citizens requesting to address the commission will be asked to complete a written comment form and present it to the deputy city recorder. In general, the chair will allow an individual 3 minutes to address the commission. A spokesperson recognized as representing a group in attendance may be allowed up to 5 minutes. This policy also applies to all public hearings. And we do have a couple that were sent to us through email, and we will read those as well. Nope, we're not going to read those today. Okay. Okay, but we'll include those in the minutes if somebody wants to read those later. Okay, so we'll move on to item 4.1, which is administrative item, consideration for approval of the Banning-Stevens amended subdivision. And then we'll look at city staff. Sheldon?
All right. Okay. Good evening. So this is just a subdivision plat amendment. The purpose of this is just to consolidate 2 lots into one larger lot. The property here is located by Butterfield Park. It's in the A110 zone. The original parcel is 0.47 acres. The applicant's looking to combine a parcel that's recorded by meets and bounds. It's not part of another subdivision into his lot, just to create a larger lot. That lot consolidation will increase his lot from 0.47 acres to 0.63 acres. Here's the proposal. Here's the, proposal of the subdivision, what he's proposing to do. This portion here is what he's looking to consolidate into his lot. This is the existing plat. This plat's not reflective of actually what's existing now. There's been some title exchanges and some deeds exchanges done on these properties to kind of changed the way this actual property looks. Looking at this map here, you can kind of see that little section there was deeded to one neighbor for access. The small thing is another parcel that was deeded that contains a water well with an easement for the adjacent properties. Again, this is what the applicant is proposing, just to increase his lot. What he's proposing does meet all city code and engineering requirements. With that being said, staff does recommend approval on this item. Do you have any questions for me? The applicant is here as well.
All right, we'll let the applicant come up now if he has anything else to share on this.
Okay.
And then this item, let me double check,
Public
is on for a public hearing, so we'll do that after that.
I don't really have anything to add.
All right, if you just want to
Trying
state your name then.
consolidate and square up the property. I mean, in the
Sounds
future.
good. Do you mind just stating your name for the record?
Banning Stevens.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions for the applicant? We'll let you have a seat then.
All right.
And then at this time, we will open the public hearing if there's anyone here. All right, then we'll close the public hearing and turn to the Planning Commission for additional comments.
I think it looks good.
Yep, no comments there.
Sounds good.
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve item 4.1 with staff's one recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, motion made by Heather, a second by Forrest. We'll call for a vote. Brody?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to item 4.2, which is a consideration to approve the preliminary plot of Teton Commercial Subdivision. And we'll look at city staff comments first.
All right, good evening. So we'll talk about Teton Commercial a little bit later tonight as well, but this is just for the preliminary plat for their commercial subdivision. This is located on the north end of the city on Mustang Way and 118 South. This is the area of the subdivision. You can see how the lots lay out on the property that is there. That's there now. It's just across the street from the high school. To the south, there's a whole bunch of residential development. The applicant is creating 7 commercial lots, and all of these lots do meet the minimum requirements for zoning. This is the proposed plat. Again, all city departments have looked at it. One of the requirements that we would add is that a 6-foot masonry fence is included on the south part of that, just to separate the commercial from the residential. There will be additional buffering as well as development takes place there to protect the residents from the commercial, the effects of the commercial development there. So here's this is a list of the the conditions of approval. That being said, we do recommend approval for this subdivision. Are there any questions for me?
Doesn't look like any questions for you now.
The applicant is here as well. So.
All right. Then we'll look for comments from the applicant at this time if he has any. And then just state your name when you come up as well. Thank you.
Hello. Corey Gust, 1474 East Lexi Lane, Cottonwood Heights. All I have to add is the way that the staff does it these days with going through all the departments sure makes it a lot nicer when we get to this point. And we only have a couple of items now on instead of these big lists. So I just like to commend that aspect. I think it's great. Other than that, I don't really have much to add.
All right. Thank you so much, Corey. Hold on. Any questions for the applicant? I think you're good. We do have this on for a public hearing as well. So we'll open the public hearing at this time if anyone has anything to say. Seeing nothing or no comments from anyone, we'll close the public hearing at this time. And we'll turn to the Planning Commission for additional comments.
So I guess I have a question regarding the accesses and stuff. I don't know if this is the item or if coming up on the next one. Item out there.
the access is coming in and out of the property. Is this the opportunity to discuss that, or is it the next?
Or is that on
next
the
item?
NDA?
Yeah, with the subdivision, it would be appropriate. That's what ought to be established with the subdivision. So, and I think our engineering department, they've looked at it, but I'm sure they'd be glad to comment on that.
Okay, because I noticed it wasn't a part of this one, it was on the next item, where it was showing full access at 2 of the driveways coming in. I think we talked about this at the last work session. So, but it doesn't look like there's room for full access on that westernmost
So the
access,
western
right?
one will actually be a full access, but they're not gonna, have that separate right turn lane there. It does meet the standard though for spacing. There needs to be 200 feet between each driveway. Bryce Terry, he reviewed it all. He reviewed the traffic study and he was good
Okay,
with it. So.
I just want to make sure, because you're right, there's not 2 separate lanes. It'll be 1 lane that they
That's
can
how
turn
they're
left
showing it.
or right from.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Okay,
But the furthest east one is just a right in, right out. And that's
Correct.
what
Yeah.
the raised median, it's a pork chop essentially.
right,
So.
right, perfect. Okay, I just want to clarify that. Thanks.
All right, any additional comments, or we'll turn to the planning commission for a motion to be made?
Is there going to be a fence on the west side between the school?
So on the west side, the zoning is commercial.
Okay.
So there will not be a fence.
Okay.
Unless the applicant decides to put one up, there's no requirement for a fence, I should say.
Okay, question, is there, I guess, I know they don't need a masonry fence. Is there a fence on that property anyway for the school already? I can't remember if there is a existing fence. Just a chain link fence? Do you know that?
Have to look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, that's more curious. Okay, thank you. We'll look for a motion to be made unless there's further discussion.
I'll go ahead and move that we approve item 4.2 with staff's recommendations as outlined here.
I'll second that one.
Motion made by Andy, a second by Brody. We'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Brody?
Yes.
Thank you so much. We'll now move on to item 4.3, which is a consideration to approve the, I'm going to mispronounce this one. I'll let you pronounce it, Sheldon.
it's
Subdivision.
For the Baldoff subdivision.
Baldoff, okay.
I think that's correct.
If it's not, that's how it will be said from now on.
I've misspelled it like so many times, but, so anyways, this property here is located over by, it's off Rose Canyon Road over by the Cove. So the parcel in question for development is a 3.8 acre parcel. It's zoned A110, and this parcel is actually part of an existing subdivision, the Baldoff subdivision. What the applicant, I guess a little history on this is the overall subdivision is 9 acres. Again, it's zoned A110, and there's an access easement across these properties. So the access easement just grants access for lot 2, kind of parallel to this road section here, I guess it's hard to tell, next to lot 4. And it goes,
Oh, at the very end, it's,
yeah, at the very end it pops out, goes into lot 3, and then comes back into lot 2.
yeah, it's that certain type of turnaround,
Yeah.
hammerhead.
And my assumption is that was created because there's a writing.
Will you go back and show that one more time? I got a question. So am I wrong to assume it actually cuts across 2 in the current roadway? Is that the turn? Is that the way it's going?
Yeah, so it's going to run into the proposed right-of-way? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking? Yeah.
That's on lot 2 right now.
Yeah,
And that's what lot 1 has access to through that.
right. So they lot 1 and lot 2 have access on that access easement there.
Okay, so they'll still have access with how this road is designed.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can write on this to draw, but yeah, so if you kind of look at the staff portion of lot 2, that easement runs all the way up that staff portion and then comes out to lot 3 and back into lot 2. So it does provide access to lot 1.
And lot 4 will retain its access from Dusty Rose?
That's correct.
Okay,
And yeah, and then the remaining of the subdivision will actually get their access out that staff portion of lot 3.
oh, thank you. You answered all my questions. I couldn't quite understand.
Okay. Let's see. So the applicant is proposing to add 4 additional lots to this subdivision. They're shown here. So the existing house on the north side will remain. That will be probably the biggest lot. And they'll proposing a public right-of-way, public access to service those 4 lots. And that's running right up off of Dusty Rose Circle.
Okay, this is confusing me again now.
Yeah.
So it comes off Dusty Rose Circle, but it looks like it's going straight and then have a hammerhead at the end, but I thought you said it would cut out into Lot 2 and then come back into it? So I guess which one is it doing?
So the easement actually goes up through Lot 2. The access easement goes up through Lot 2, through the staff portion, and then cuts into Lot 3 and then goes back into Lot 2. But that public right-of-way would be still providing that access to Lot 2. Does that make sense?
So is this going to be the new, I guess, approach to Dusty Rose Circle? Or will Lot 2 still, will there be 2 roads right next to each other?
So yeah, there's going to be 2 roads next to each other.
Okay.
So there's a public access easement there on the left side.
Yeah.
And the public road will be right next to that.
So more or less it's going to be, I don't know if it's paved or not, but we'll say that there's going to be a dirt path that goes into 2 or
Yeah.
paved or whatever it is. And that's going to be the access for 1 as well.
Right.
So the access to 1 is still off of Lot 2 and that's not the actual road. That's just the,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm there now.
All right.
Sorry, took me a sec.
Thanks for asking the question.
Okay, again,
There, that makes more sense.
the applicant here is proposing, a 4-lot subdivision within this existing subdivision, so amending the initial subdivision to add these 4 additional lots. Some items we look at, zoning and engineering. As far as zoning compliance goes, the lot widths in areas meet our zoning requirements. Density based on the overall subdivision, it's 9 acres. Based on the base density, they're allotted up to 9 units. With this amendment, they'll be up to 6 units, so they're not exceeding that density requirement. Well, 6 lots, sorry. So another issue we had with the zoning is the way they're proposing, so Dusty Rose Lane will be a public right-of-way, but there will be this remnant parcel here, which our ordinance does not allow remnant parcels. So we're asking the applicant to actually include that into the public right-of-way and dedicate that to the city. Here's a road section. So as mentioned in the staff report, and as we discussed earlier, since this road runs to the edge of the property, they're only required to install to the back of curb up to the property. But due to the existing conditions on the site with the slope grade and stuff, they're concerned if they run it to the property line, there may be some undercutting, which will cause the roadway to fail. So they're holding about 3 feet off the property line. So in this section here, we're asking the applicant to work with the city and I guess get into a maintenance agreement to maintain any landscaping and et cetera in that area. So it would be the responsibility of the applicant, not the city, to maintain that, even though it will be within a public right-of-way. When the future development comes in on the west, that developer will be required to install the remaining sidewalk and park strip. Engineering did have some concerns regarding site drainage. Particularly, they were concerned with, I guess, the historic, looking at the 100-year, 80 percentile. I'm not sure how that all works, but they're concerned with the historic flow from the west properties flowing onto their property and inundating their actual existing retention they're providing. So they're concerned if that happens, they need to provide a path to guide that water to the public right-of-way through easements and et cetera. And that's something they still have to work out with engineering. So as you see, that's why there's so many conditions actually on this subdivision. So staff does recommend approval with the following conditions. Again, being commission, you do have the option to continue this item, deny, or approve that. So I'll leave the conditions up. If you have any questions for me.
I'm trying to remember, is this the one that there is a retention pond or there will be some retention that's located on Lot 1? Was there something tied to Lot 1 with retention?
So as far as existing or?
I'm just trying to remember if this is the property that I was thinking that there was going to be some retention that was going to take place on Lot 1. Is it? So I can see it here. I assume that's Lot 1 there with the retention.
Yeah, so the purple squares, so there's retention there on Lot 1, and then over on Lot 4, there's retention there as well. If I understand that the way the street's graded due to the topography, it's graded like a 6-degree slope, and it all goes down towards the new lots, I guess. It's not a crown on the road. So they had to do that just because of the topography, so they have to push all the water to one side of the road. So that's where they're placing the retentions here at these locations. There's additional retention for each property here for the Lot 2, Lot 3. That's kind of just to retain any stormwater collected on those sites. I don't know. And Josh is here if you have any more specific questions. I'm sure he's better at answering those than I am.
Okay. Thank you, Sheldon. Any questions for Sheldon or Josh? Josh, do you mind sort of explaining how the water retention is? Because I guess for some reason I thought that some of the retention is occurring on not the lots that are asking for approval on.
Oh, okay.
Maybe Lot 2 or something.
So there was a discussion with the adjacent lot owner to help mitigate some of that runoff. There was a discussion with this. We'll go back to this. So Lot 2, there was some discussion about maybe putting some retention on his property to capture that water. Because the way it's graded in the road, the existing road there, it has like a little retaining wall they built up. So all the water from Lot 1 and Lot 2 run from Dusty Rose down to Lot 2, and they run into Lot 3. And they were discussing with that adjacent lot owner, maybe they could put additional retention on that pond to help mitigate any additional flooding onto their property. So that was just something they discussed. It's not something they want to pursue. I think their option is they're going to try to get the water moved to the PUEs, to the water drainage easements, and push it out to the right-of-ways from there.
Okay. I think that was where I was trying to make sure I understood what was happening. I remember reading something on that.
Okay.
So,
All right. Any questions
there's only 9.
for Sheldon?
I'm just trying to figure out, there's 9 conditions in our packet, but there's 10 here. I was just curious which one was new on this list. Oh, the first, well, no,
Okay, so
yeah.
maybe when they added the columns to this presentation, maybe it splits them up. I don't know. I'm looking through it now. So
Yeah, I'm looking at it here now. All right, we probably continue while I look at these.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll let you have a seat, and then if the applicant's here, if they want to come up and share any additional information.
I'm Jaden Haas. I'm here on behalf of Brad Baldoff. He's the homeowner in, I guess it's Lot 3 on that map, down on that corner. No extra comments, any for me.
All right, any questions for him? I'll let you have a seat. Thank you. And then this item is on for a public hearing, so if there's any comments, we'll open the public hearing at this time. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at this time, and we'll turn to the Planning Commission for additional discussion or a motion to be made.
So item 1 is the additional one that's not in the packet, by the way.
Okay, which is pretty common.
Yep.
As long as number 3 covers the drainage, I'm pretty good with this. Item 3 on this, recommendations.
I'll make a motion to approve item 4.3 with staff's 10 recommendations.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Heather, a second by Andy. We'll call for a vote. Brody?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to legislative items. Our first legislative item is item 5.1. It's a discussion and consideration of a technical update to the moderate income housing element. And Susie, I think, is online, and so she'll be sharing some stuff, but we'll let Michael take it from here, I think, and then we'll turn the time over to her when she's ready.
So as the Planning Commission is aware, in 2019, the Utah State Code amended their regulations for cities relative to what we need to have in our general plan. In that year, we did adopt a new moderate income housing element of the general plan. In 2022, the state legislature amended those standards for that plan. As you know, we just completed our general plan. This is one specific element of the overall general plan. And so we're just bringing back to the commission and to the council some minor technical amendments to the moderate income housing plan for the city. Our consultant, Susan Pethram with FFKR, I believe is available online. And she has the presentation on this tonight. Were you able to bring that up, Destiny? She emailed. I apologize. I thought you have that? Maybe while you're bringing that up, Susan, are you able to hear us and participate tonight online?
Yes, can you hear me?
There she is.
We can, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great.
We'll go ahead and turn the time over to her.
Okay, and do you need me to share my screen or do we have the PDF?
Is that easier to do a screen share? Okay, just 1 second. She's pulling it up for us.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then while we're waiting, I don't know if you want to share just a little bit on the moderate income housing. If there's anything you think relevant to the...
Susie, do you want to go ahead and proceed while we're trying to bring up your presentation?
Sure, yeah, that's great. As some of you may know, the 2022 legislative session made some amendments to the requirements for moderate income housing plans as well as the reporting. And with the current plan, we feel like Herman City had most of the content, but just needed some technical restructuring to clarify that there was an implementation plan in there and the opportunity to add some specific benchmarks for implementing the action items that we had identified previously. So that's why we're calling it a technical amendment. It's not really changing any of the strategies or approaches or context of the plan, but just making those modifications so that Herman can meet those requirements and the new deadlines. So
We do have it on the screen now, Susie.
Okay, great. Yep, I can see that. So just a quick overview slide, just more to remind us all like what the definitions of a moderate income household are and what they can afford to spend on housing. So per state code, moderate income is defined as 80% of the area median income, and that is for Salt Lake County as a whole, and not Herman City specifically. The affordable housing budget is reflected as no more than 30% of gross monthly income for the typical household, and that 30% should include all the housing related costs, including utilities and mortgage and hazard insurance if it's an ownership reason. And the moderate income housing planning and reporting also evaluates affordable housing opportunities for households that make 30% and 50% of the area median income. And those are also commonly known as either low income or very low income. So that's just a quick overview of the group we're planning for. As most people know, there's been some affordability challenges lately, and those have heightened recently. And the state is just looking to help facilitate what they can to encourage development of more affordable housing options throughout the state. So Herman's current plan, it was one that we worked with you to adopt back in 2019. And the plans are structured to be 5-year plans. So this plan, would be good through 2024. And that's just a quick note for why we haven't gone back to update any of the existing conditions data or findings, because those are still the baseline that we're working from for this plan amendment. So that's just a clarification that's a little bit different than what we had indicated in the staff report. This 2019 plan was structured to meet the requirements that were passed in 2019 as part of Senate Bill 34. And that was just the state's first attempt to be a little bit more strategic and proactive about identifying strategies for trying to make moderate income housing planning and reporting a little bit more of a reality. Cities are required to identify 3 or more, and Harriman was able to identify 6 strategies that reflected the city's current efforts and direction for meeting moderate income housing. And the way that we did that was just referencing them in relation to 7 strategies that Harriman developed for their action plan. So the city strategies represented the city's approach for implementing the goals and objectives for moderate income housing, and then related those to the state code strategies. So moving forward, just on the next slide, what we are looking to clarify is the new moderate income housing plan requirements. So in 2022, House Bill 462 was passed, and that modified the requirements for the plan, as well as the requirements and format of the annual report that cities are required to do to just report on progress towards meeting some of those objectives and goals. The key points from HB 462, it requires cities to adopt an implementation plan, but also one that has timeline and measures for implementing state code strategies. It amends the list of strategies. Most of the previous strategies have been revised or combined. The intent was to be more clear on what the strategies were meant to accomplish, as well as the addition of some new strategies. Another point is that strategies needed to be linked to actionable implementation steps with a timeline for implementing them. And then the reports, which had been due December 1st, are now due by October 1st. And that's why we're here tonight, is to talk about amendments that we propose making to the current moderate income housing plan so that we can meet the requirements of HB 462 and have the report submitted by October 1st. So for this report that's due, cities need to identify the strategies as represented in the 2022 code update and include them as stated verbatim in code as their strategies in the moderate income housing plan. And then they also need to show that they have an implementation plan with those measures and benchmarks for implementing each of those strategies from the state code. For reporting in 2023 and beyond, the idea is that cities will use this implementation plan as a tool to provide more specific details related to the actions they've taken trying to implement the moderate income housing strategies. Okay. The amended moderate income housing plan primarily is focused on technical modifications to the section 1.5, which was entitled Making It Happen. And these are intended to meet these new requirements while still maintaining the intent and purpose of the 2019 plan. Just a quick overview of those modifications. What we are doing is just clarifying and clearly communicating that this section is serving as Harriman's implementation plan for moderate income housing. We're including the state strategies are now the moderate income housing plan strategies. And what we have done is recraft the city's 2019 moderate income housing plan strategies as the action items and implementation measures for those state strategies. And then we've added specific benchmarks and a timeline for each of those recrafted 2019 plan strategies that are now the action items. So the next slides are just giving that side-by-side overview of what the current section is, and then we'll go into how the strategies have been reworded, and then how we've recrafted Harriman's 2019 strategies into action plans. So in 2019, the plan currently, section 1.5, entitled How We Make It Happen. The subsection action plan is entitled Making It Happen, and it has 7 strategies that Harriman City identified as action items for achieving the goal and detailed objectives of the moderate income housing plan. And then what we did in this 2019 plan is just linking by reference to the state code strategies that we felt matched with the city's strategies. The full text of those state code strategies were in a sidebar and included for reference so that people could see of the 23 strategies, the 6 that Harriman had selected. In the amended 2022 plan, we've just retitled that section 1.5 to add the words implementation plan, just making that clear. The state code strategies have been added as the strategies for this section. And then in the action plan, making it happen section, the previous city strategies are now those 6 action items, and each of those action items have benchmarks for achieving the overall goal and objectives of the plan. And as before, some of the action items help to implement more than one individual state code strategy. We've also just included the updated full text of all of the state code strategies for reference in a sidebar. So the next series of slides, this first section is just showing how the state code strategies have been reworded, and these are the ones that Harriman had selected before. So this first one is just talking about rezoning for densities. The new update is just switched out facilitate for assure, just providing a little bit more flexibility, knowing that cities don't really have control over assuring production of moderate income housing. Strategy B was the next one that Harriman had selected. This one is just clarifying that the focus is on demonstrating that investment in the rehabilitation or expansion of infrastructure that again is facilitating the construction of moderate income housing. So just shifting the focus on that investment. The next one, strategy E, this is regarding accessory dwelling units and just clarifying that this refers to either internal or detached accessory dwelling units. Strategy F is the next one that Harriman had selected. It's just adding some more direct language about zoning or rezoning for these higher density residential developments in commercial or mixed use zones that are near major transit investment corridors, as well as the commercial centers or employment centers. Strategy G is the next one, and this is just adding some more specific language about actually amending a city's land use regulations to allow for higher density and just clarifying that this is in commercial or mixed use zones that are near those major transit investment corridors. And then the last one is a little bit of a shift. A previous strategy that Harriman had selected was strategy L, which was preserve existing moderate income housing. That one has been removed and combined with the previous strategy K that was talking about preserving subsidized or low to moderate income units. And so strategies K and L have been combined into this new updated strategy K. And that is just being a little bit more specific about the ways cities should be working to preserve existing and new housing, whether it's moderate income housing or subsidized units. And that's by utilizing that landlord incentive program, looking for providing deed restricted units through a grant program, or establishing a housing loss mitigation fund. So those are the changes to the 6 strategies. that Harriman had previously selected, and we have proposed that we keep all 6 of those strategies and just revising the action item to represent the changes and shifts in that terminology of the new strategies. So before, in 2019, the city's strategies have now been recrafted as action items or measures. And so the previous strategy 4, which supported state code strategies A, F, and G, that is now action item or measure number 1. And it's just making the terminology just a little bit more proactive in nature, and just saying Harriman will ensure that zoning designations allow for higher density or moderate income housing development in the town center, near the Slick campus, and adjacent to commercial and employment centers. The next action item, or measure 2, was previously represented as strategy 5, that talked about continuing to encourage PUD neighborhoods with some small lot sizes and integrating small lot sizes into developments. So again, just kind of recrafting that Harriman will continue to encourage those measures to help support a mix of housing options. This implements strategy A. Previously, we had it linked to strategy B, but with the way that state code has been reworded, with the focus on demonstrating investment in transportation infrastructure, we felt that this action item really only worked to implement strategy A now. Okay, the third action item is focused on that rehabilitation or expansion of infrastructure. Before, it wasn't really clear like if the focus was on the infrastructure or facilitating the housing. And so what we've done is just recrafted this action item to focus specifically on rehabilitation of infrastructure or facilitating construction of new infrastructure. And based on the fact that Harriman doesn't currently have that major transit corridor in place, the focus is on expanding active transportation infrastructure to connect to other regional transit opportunities, and that can help facilitate construction of moderate income housing that can then link to that transit. Okay, the fourth action item, previously represented as the city's strategy C, and this is talking about the accessory dwelling units that Harriman will consider allowing detached ADUs in appropriate residential neighborhoods, and will work to track both internal attached ADUs and detached ADUs. Okay, action item number 5 is talking about allowing for multifamily or townhome mixed-use development as buffers between commercial and single-family residential areas, as well as in the town center, the city's downtown. So we've just added major transit investment corridors as identified in the regional plan to this action item. And then the last action item, number 6, is representing, or previously was represented by strategy 1, which was originally, just talking about continuing to monitor affordability in proportion to overall development, and just making sure that the city is staying on top of looking to ensure that affordable housing needs are anticipated. Because of the way strategy L was reworked into strategy K, we felt like the action item could be a little bit more specific and build off of the Housing Task Force as a mechanism for monitoring that affordability and looking to create attainable housing for moderate income households. So those are the new action items. And then the next series of slides just outlines the benchmarks that we have identified with each of those action items. So we've outlined them over a 5-year period, since the plan is a 5-year plan. And what we've done is just try to identify like a sequential process of starting with the benchmark of identifying where the city is now with each action item, and then looking to analyze the areas that didn't correspond, either on the blue map that didn't correspond with zones to allow densities, and then, for years 3, 4, and 5, start to initiate rezoning as necessary if there's areas that are identified that aren't in accordance with each other. So those are the benchmarks for item 1. The benchmarks for item number 2 is just breaking it down in a similar way, just identifying where things are now, where are small lot sizes allowed, where are the densities that help facilitate the production of moderate income housing, and specifically with the planned unit development overlay, looking to see if there's any changes that are needed to better facilitate the production of moderate income housing, and then starting to evaluate where residential zones might support that integration of small lot sizes, and just being a little bit more specific about how that might look, and then using years 3, 4, and 5 to start to initiate any updates as identified above. The benchmarks for item number 3, coordinating the rehab or expansion of active transportation infrastructure. This is something that the city is already has underway. They've identified prioritization of funding for projects, but as part of the moderate income housing plan, just looking to identify zones and areas that would benefit from those infrastructure investments in relation to moderate income housing, and then just looking over the next years to go through that sequence of prioritizing and then initiating the expansion when the funding becomes available. Okay, measure number 4, talking about the accessory dwelling units. So this is one where the city will be required to be able to report on ADUs that are becoming present in the city. And so part of that first year is to identify the zones that could support ADUs, but also establish an effective tracking system to document all types of accessory dwelling units. The second step would be to identify the parameters or criteria where the city might allow detached ADUs in the different zones, and then begin to prioritize and update regulations that meet the city's criteria that was identified in 4C. Okay, the action items for measure number 5. This is the one where allowing for multifamily or townhomes as buffers between commercial and single family. So again, just starting with identifying it where that's allowed currently, identifying areas on the future land use map that don't correspond, and then prioritizing those mismatch areas, and then using years 3, 4, and 5 to initiate the rezoning as identified according to the priorities in the previous step. And then the last action item and implementation measure number 6, looking at the housing task force, which will help facilitate preservation and creation of attainable housing. So this is one where those benchmarks are sort of an ongoing process. So just monitoring affordable housing and the proportion to overall development, monitoring the Section 42 and low income housing tax credit housing projects, those subsidized units, when they might expire, and then beginning to evaluate some of those strategies that the state code identified for looking to preserve moderate income housing or subsidized units. So the deed restrictions or a down payment assistance program, and then prioritizing those programs over years 3, 4, and 5. I believe that was the last slide. Just looking to turn it over for public hearing or any questions and discussion the Planning Commission might have on this item.
Thank you, Susie. Any questions from Planning Commission?
I guess on that last item, if they did like a down payment assistance or just evaluating deed restrictions, who would manage those programs? like within the city? Is that planning?
So this is something that under Mayor Palmer's efforts, we've just been discussing. He's invited some development partners and financial advisors to come and just talk with us about options, about how that works. So yeah, it's just something that we're exploring. In fact, Todd and I were both in a meeting last week with the mayor, and we're discussing these options. And again, we're just looking for things that we can explore and evaluate and look and see if it's going to fit for this city, right? To help us achieve or demonstrate that we're working to achieve these goals that the state is requiring of us. So yeah, it's all something that we need to explore.
Because I know in the past, we talked about maybe when we have a new development that comes in, have them have some low-income housing within each development so that it, is in different spots in our I guess city, not one concentrated place.
Yeah, and the efforts that we've been discussing have been very, very small, very minimal. It's not like a large project.
Yeah.
We were thinking like 5 units, 10 units, something like that, something very minimal. At least initially, that's been the conversation.
I was a part of the Ivory development when they offered workforce housing to some of their units just on Redwood Road. And that is HOA managed. It's deed restricted on them, and the city's not even sure which ones are deed restricted because they want to keep it anonymous.
Yeah.
But it was a partner with the developer that the city had to explore to offer that.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions before?
Curious what our AMI might be, our median income for our area.
So one of the changes in this structure or the reporting cycle that the state is requiring is they will be producing the data that we will then turn around and evaluate. And unfortunately, last time we checked, Susie, that data had not been published yet, right? So it's something we will be gathering, yeah. But I don't think the most current data has been available to us yet.
I do know that previously, and this is just a clarification that for moderate income housing plans, it's not using Harriman's median income, it's using the median income for Salt Lake County. And I think when we did this report in 2020, the Salt Lake County area median income for a 3-person household, which was Salt Lake County's average household size, was right around $80,000. At that time, Sherman's median household income was right around $95,000. So what Harriman is looking to provide is an opportunity for a 3-person household in Salt Lake County the opportunity to live in Harriman and show that there's opportunities, that represent sort of Harriman's share of affordable housing for the county as a whole. Hopefully that answers your question, but I think we are looking for that most recent data for moderate income housing plans. And another tricky thing is that the way a lot of the data is calculated is that it tends to be a couple years out of date because they recraft a lot of the census and American Community Survey data to specifically match housing, and it takes HUD a while to do those transformations.
Thank you, Susie. This is on for a public hearing. I'm going to open it up at this time, and then we can go back to more discussion, if that's okay, Susie. Is there anything else you need to share?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. So I will open this up for a public hearing at this time. And I'll close the public hearing at this time, and then I'll turn to the Planning Commission for additional discussion, if any.
Well, for me, I sit there and think, I mean, deed restrictions are good, down payment assistance is helpful, but it's hard, in my opinion, for the city to, I guess, have mechanisms to regulate the market effectively.
And again, we're just evaluating. This is just something that we were already doing informally. Yeah, it's just, it's not a commitment, it's just something that we're looking at.
I think that's the key word you said, right? Evaluate. That's what both of those have. Evaluate those opportunities.
And with this item, we're just, if there's any other recommendations, moving it on to City Council at this point.
Right, yeah.
No,
We
looks
have
good.
to submit this final report on October 1st, which again, it was moved up this year. But really, this is just
It's the city's
minor
best ability to try to
that
follow the state standard
We're
of
just
what
taking
they've
our
established.
2019 plan and trying to adjust it to comply with the 2022 language.
Agreed. All right, with that being said, is there any other discussion, or can we make a motion and a recommendation?
It looks great. That's good.
Okay.
Is that a motion?
Let's see what item is it. Hold on,
I know
let me
that's
find
not a
it.
motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to recommend approval for item 5.1.
A second.
All right, motion made by Brody, a second by Forrest, and we'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And Brody?
Yes.
All right, thank you, guys. We'll move on to item 5.2, which is on for a public hearing as well, and we'll turn to city staff.
All right, well, I told you we would be talking about Teton Commercial again, and here we are. So we've looked at the subdivision already, and so we'll get into some more of how the property will actually develop in the future. So again, this is the location of the property. This is an image just taken from Google Earth showing the boundaries of where this development will take place. Currently, the property is zoned C2, so it's zoned for commercial development to take place. The applicants have approached the city and desire to enter into this master development agreement, which will kind of facilitate and help development occur that will be consistent with each other, right? So it kind of have develop a theme and get the same kind of signage and the same architectural requirements and such, same color scheme. The applicants are the guests. They're both here tonight, and they have also facilitated the Anthem commercial development. So they're very familiar with this process. So we're looking at a couple of things, the general plan and the zoning ordinance in terms of compliance and how does this MDA fit into that. The property that they're looking at is just over 18 acres. And these are some of the elements that are included, right? So there's some signage that's provided, some updated elevations that will take place as development goes in there. And then again, the subdivision, which we've looked at already. Just by way of information, in the packet that was sent out to the Planning Commission last week, or since then, the applicant has reached out to the city. They've provided an update to their MDA. They've taken the three recommendations from staff, and they've implemented that into an MDA. That MDA will be presented to the city council, depending on the outcome of this meeting, of course. But those recommendations have been considered. They've put them into an MDA and then presented that back to the city. So we didn't include that. We didn't want to create any confusion, but just to be clear, those have been implemented and updated into a new MDA agreement. And we'll go over what those were. So this first slide is kind of what the city gets as part of this agreement. So one of the things that the city gets is a waiver to repay for the sidewalk and the trail improvements along 118th South. The applicant is maintaining the 60% brick and stone requirement on all buildings. They're providing an option to reduce the setback to 10 feet from public streets to make the site more accessible to pedestrians. It's not a requirement, but it is an option. They have provided sidewalk connections throughout the property, and they've defined when those will occur as part of the development, who will put those in. And on that larger parcel, they anticipate a large, potentially a grocer or something similar to that. And they've added a provision in the ordinance, which is similar to what we have now for CMU. So, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but they're only allowing split face CMU on buildings that are 35,000 square feet and over, and that will be reviewed by the city council. Currently, city ordinance allows it when it's 40,000, but to provide some flexibility, they are asking for the 35,000.
And just clarity, Clint, so the sidewalk trail improvement along 118, that's the asphalt trail. It's
Right.
not to do both.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And then, again, you get consistent architecture and signage throughout the project. Kind of helps with placemaking and such. So in terms of general plan compliance, the applicant was vested with the former general plan, which showed this as being commercial land use. The newly adopted plan takes a more neighborhood commercial approach, something that's a little more pedestrian and bike friendly. The applicant has made some provisions in the ordinance or in their MDA to provide a little more flexibility in terms of pedestrian and bike friendly options to take place. And then, so these are some of the updates that they've made. You can see this is their sidewalk connection plan. The red sidewalks, those will be sidewalks that they will put in themselves as being the developer of the project. The blue sidewalks will come in as on a site-by-site basis to provide accessibility to all those commercial pads. Again, there's the provision to move buildings closer to the street. As they do so, there's additional architectural requirements that are put in place, and then there would be no parking or drive aisles in those, and any of the setbacks that are adjacent to a public street. One item to note as well is on lot 7, there will be kind of an amenity, a pedestrian amenity, as that site develops, whether it's a pavilion, some place where people can gather, can eat, maybe it has benches. That amenity will kind of be hashed out as the development takes place, but that is a provision that it's being considered as part of this MDA as well. This is their parking standards. I know this has been a concern. We've talked about this quite a bit. There are a couple of areas that they're proposing to have a reduced parking standard from what the city currently allows. First would be with a restaurant with fast food and a drive-through. Currently, we allow, or we require, 1 per 100. They'd be looking at reducing that to 143 square feet, which is a fairly minimal reduction. And then the other reduction would be with the restaurant general. It's like a sit-down restaurant, and I can speak to that a little bit more on this next slide, I believe. So we've sat down with the applicant and kind of gone through their parking requirements. And we did some additional research. We looked at these 5 other restaurants and kind of assessed what kind of parking what kind of parking they have provided in those areas. So as you can see in the column, it says parking per seating square foot. Most of those are 1 per 60. They go from 1 to 41 square feet to 1 to 75. The applicant is providing 2 per 100 or 1 per 50, which falls pretty comfortably within that scale of what has been provided in other restaurant locations.
So that's what's been provided, not what's actually being witnessed or is actually happening at those locations? These right. This is just what was required of them, but not actually what is happening then.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just looked at the site, counted the parking stalls, looked at how big the building was. So part of the parking requirement is to understand that the parking is not based on the square footage of the entire building. It'll only be based on the portion of the building that's available to the public. So, you know, and most of those, you know, it comes out to about 80% of the building, right? Something along those lines. And anyways, so what they're proposing, like I said, isn't too far out of what is occurring in other sites or what was required in other areas. You know, you look at the garage grill that was just approved here not too long ago by the city, and they would have fewer parking stalls there than what is being required by this applicant now. And also another thing to keep in mind with this provision is that the entire site will have shared parking throughout. So, you know, if parking fills up one location, I mean, they'll have several places where parking will be available for the tenants and the patrons of that shopping area. Before I go too much further, we did make a recommendation to impose a maximum parking requirement, and they have provided that in their update as well. So,
And I think all those are pretty okay parking, except for Sausalito's. I've been there before. You park at Home Depot almost.
Right. So an example of shared parking, right?
And then you walk a mile.
Get your steps in.
The rest of them are pretty good.
Okay, so in terms of zoning compliance, like I mentioned, they are maintaining the city standard of 60% brick and stone. There is a provision to allow buildings with 35,000 square feet to have CMU. That will be on a city council consideration basis. So they'll provide, you know, those elevations to go to the city council and be approved there. And the split face will also have to match the color scheme of the proposal as well. So this is just the proposed color board. You can see some of the materials, some of the colors, some are accents, some are not. Just to get an idea of what and how this site will feel like as it develops. They are providing or requiring bike parking, and so you can see the bike rack that they'll be installing on site as buildings develop and sites develop there. In terms of setbacks, so along private streets, the requirement will be, so these are the streets that are internal, not facing 118th and Mustang Trail. So it's 20 feet from back of the curb, and then 10 feet of that will be required for landscaping. The other 10 does allow for parking and drive aisles. And then along public streets, the requirement will be 20 feet from property line, with a couple of exceptions, one being that it's 15 with a 2-foot berm, or 10 feet with architectural elements and the connectivity requirements provided. Again, one of the recommendations that we made when we reviewed this last, was to limit the ability to have parking or drive aisles in any setback adjacent to a public street. And so they have accommodated that in their update as well. So this is our 3 recommendations. We do recommend approving this and moving it on to the City Council for consideration. They have provided these 3 recommendations that we've shown so far. And that being said, we do recommend approval. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer what I can. I know that the applicant is here, and they could probably provide some input as well.
Can you go back to the site map? Let's see.
Showing the subdivision?
Yeah, the subdivision. So is there going to be, each one of these lots, are they going to have 2 drive-ups on each side, or do we even know that part yet? Because
that's to be determined, yeah. So that will come in on a site basis.
So those will come back in for review, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then depending on the size of the lots, I think all of the lots over an acre, so depending on the size of the development that takes place, anything that's over an acre will come back to the Planning Commission for consideration as a conditional use.
Sounds good. Looks good.
All right. I don't have any questions at this time. Might in a second.
All right.
If the applicant's here, if you want to share any additional information.
Hello again.
Hello.
I just want to add one more thing that Clinton didn't touch on. On the parking, we have to provide a parking study. Otherwise, it's just the way the ordinance is on parking. So it'll come, if a building comes in and on a case-by-case basis, and it has a restaurant that goes with it, and they want to go to the lower parking ratio that we're listing here, we got to provide a parking study that shows that that works as well.
Okay.
So other than that, I think there's just a few minor things, but most of the stuff is per the city ordinances at this point.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. This is on for a public hearing, so I'm going to open up the public hearing at this time as well. This is the quietest public hearings I've ever had. We're like 0 for 4. So I'll close the public hearing at this time. And then, well, if the applicant wants to come back up, I did want to address stuff, but I wanted, just in case there was any public hearing, I wanted to make sure that we could address that at the same time. So there were 3 things that I just wanted a little clarity on, or just had some questions on. So one is there's no requirement for fencing on the west side, and I don't think that we need a precast wall or anything like that, but I'm a little concerned because there's a school on the other side of having a chain link. Do you know if there's a chain link there?
There is a chain link there,
Okay.
but we'll probably end up putting the fence there too.
Yeah, that's at least the minimum of a chain link. I just don't want the kids crossing in or parents parking in the commercial, just have the kids cross it over.
Just for the visual, I mean, I think we'll probably end up putting a fence there.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm okay with that. I just wanted to check that. Then on its project entrances, just had a little bit of a concern that we actually brought up in our pre-meeting, because you mentioned that, and I just skipped over. It says, let's get to the driveway access points into the projects, which access points include 2 full access driveways into the project. Such access points are not restricted by a non-traversable median. The only worry we have with that is Daybreak borders us, and we can't keep them from putting a median. I'm perfectly okay without putting one from Harriman's side, but the concern is that one may still go in from their side that we may not be able to control, and so I want to at least bring that up. And so that might be something to bring up with City Council to see if there's anything they can do or not do with that. And so that's one thing there. And then the other thing I had, which it's below that, and it talks about franchise opportunities, and how sometimes they'll have their own architect and things like that. That sort of is their brand and different things like that. I'm okay with that as well. The only concern that I have is if we go with the franchise, which lowers the standard, and then franchise didn't care. They could have still stayed with the Harriman standard, but have some branding or some minor changes to do it. I want to make sure that we still can maintain as high a standard with Harriman as we can with helping them with their franchise too. And that was, it's not a concern to me so much as just if there's a way to word it to where it's like if they come in and they're okay with the standards, that they get as close as they can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, as part of this MDA, they will be required to get our approval too.
Okay.
So we'll be working with them before they ever bring it into you to make sure they're meeting the MDA.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons we want this, is it sets the standard, and especially we're looking for an anchor tenant, and they want to see this too.
Absolutely. Yeah. But those were the only areas that I wanted to. I'm good with the setbacks. I'm good with the parking. I'm not too worrisome about that anymore. But those were the areas that I just want to make sure we cover, which I don't think they're very big. I think they just need to be addressed.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because we'll need to talk about that if South Jordan
Yeah.
can do something there, because that's an important.
Yeah, that'd be big.
It is an important thing. And so that needs to be brought up probably with the city council. Our body doesn't have any control over what South
Who
Jordan
has
does.
jurisdiction of 118th? Is it shared or
It's shared.
It is shared. Okay, so it's not, all right.
And I know they put a median in farther down the road, which we didn't do.
Right.
And so that's why it's something that needs to be addressed or thought about.
Yeah, I think so too.
So, anything else from the planning commission for questions or to address with the applicant?
No, I think your elevations look really nice.
Yep, and I'm happy with some of the agreements that you and the staff have came to. I'm good, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate it. We're happy to have you come into our city. We really are.
Well, we're excited to get going.
Good.
Thanks.
You know, I do have a question real quick. So in our last motion, we said wasn't it Mustang Trail Way that they couldn't turn left? Wasn't it you could turn right only?
No.
Was
No,
it there?
No, we
Where
were
was
looking at
it?
118.
It was 118.
118.
I had the question on the westmost access on 118 South.
Okay.
So, yeah, the one on Teton Trail Lane was always right in, or full access, which lines up with the access to the high school on the other side,
But
which is nice.
what was in the last motion? Can we look that up fast? Because there was an item that staff
Just
put
the
on
items
there.
from staff, the 10 staff
Well,
items.
they want to put a pork chop on the one right in, right out.
Which is your eastmost,
Yeah.
right there that she's, which is showing.
Yeah, so it's a
Which
little
we've already-
arrow.
Okay.
Yeah,
Which makes sense because of the,
It's too
I don't know what it's called, the little triangle you have there, which only allows a right in, right out.
Yeah, exactly.
So that makes sense.
That one can only be right in, right out
And
anyway.
that will happen as part of the subdivision.
Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good. And then on 10.5, what Chris was talking about, he was talking about he'd be okay with it like on our side, but for me, I'm not okay with that I don't think that a developer should put restrictions on what we can do as far as
Traffic
with
mitigation.
traffic, right? Because there's going to be a lot of changes in that area, especially with Olympia coming in. That concerns me. So I would like to see 10.5 changed significantly.
Yeah, and that's something that you could include in your motion.
Okay.
Just make some recommendations, yeah.
So it needs to be talked about regardless, it sounds like, from a city council perspective. So when you guys get there. Okay,
What you're talking about is relating to the median that we need to address.
Yeah,
with
I
this.
think, well, I'm not going to put words in Heather's mouth, but I think it's the idea of taking that out so it's not restricted. And from my perspective, I'm okay either way, but keep in mind, we don't have control of what South Jordan does there. So if they say it's a traffic hazard and they put a median in there, they don't care. And we can't, at this time, I don't think we can do anything. And Clint's agreeing with me, it looks like.
Yeah, it's just that bottom paragraph. The city agrees that the city will not install non-traversable medians or otherwise enact traffic directions or restrictions. So that
Would you be
bottom
comfortable more if
section.
they said unless found that because of safety reasons need to
No,
put
I don't think
Not
it
at
should
all.
be in there
Okay.
at all.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's just something else to think about as we go to the city.
I want to make sure, if there's safety concerns, I want an island.
Yeah, that's how I view it.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
That's the only time I view it being necessary, probably.
Well, and if
Yeah.
118 changes
Well, we
because of the
did,
amount of
we
traffic.
did do a traffic study on the whole thing, so that's
Right.
what
Yeah.
determined which full motion was and which weren't.
Right, but when it comes to application and you get the developments in, because you don't know quite yet what's happening and what development's coming in here, if traffic gets so heavy, there's concerns with some of these movements, we may want to make that middle one, for instance, say right in, right out only by putting in an island to block that, just from a safety standpoint. Not cutting off complete, full access on 118th, but we may want to
I think when we make a recommendation to city council, we probably just need to raise our concerns with that part, but I appreciate it.
Okay.
Corey.
Yep.
All right. Planning Commission, is there additional discussion we want to make on this? So my recommendation, based off what we were talking about, is probably sharing, just a recommendation to City Council to consider or look at 10.5 specifically, and maybe share what some of the concerns are. If you make a motion and that's the way you feel, if you feel like there's no need, either way, but probably need to recommend that they talk about it anyway because of the concern with the other city. And so either way there. from that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I would probably, and it sounds like the developers already thought about this, potentially look at the fencing on the west side, just because it is next to a school. And so that might be the only other recommendation, to make sure that we bring that up. If there's other ones as well, feel free to share those in your motion or recommendation.
So I think I'm ready to make a motion, but I want to just clarify then for item 10.5, the two concerns are, work with South Jordan City as well, and then address any, allowing a raised median if there are significant safety concerns. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think.
How do we want to phrase that?
For me, I don't care if there's a medium, but I bring it up because South Jordan could put one in at any time, no matter what.
Right.
For me. I think
So it needs
Heather's
to be
was more of, don't restrict the city from putting one in if they feel like it is needed down the road.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And so
So
there's two different, depending on what motion you make.
I agree with Heather, and I think that eliminating the last two sentences of that paragraph of 10.5, that we need to not restrict the city in working through traffic issues on those streets. Because that's what that's doing. That's saying you can't do anything on these streets that's going to restrict anything for us in the future, and the city shouldn't be doing that, making those kind of
commitments,
especially with all the development that's coming in, east of or west of this. Like, you never know what.
I think it's all of 10.5 though, if you put it all together.
Well, that's just it. I think the recommendation would be that they evaluate
review that.
10.5 and to make sure that they address the concerns of, not prohibiting future
City,
median.
but also
City from
realizing
doing that in the future or
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
yeah. Okay.
Hold on.
Just one point on
Sure.
that. Across the street from us there is on South Jordan side, the big detention pond. So we're not gonna have traffic coming off that other side there, which, that's a good aspect.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
We're just worried about the 60,000 new people that are coming in.
Right.
And who knows what'll happen.
Because
with
honestly, it might be 5 or 10 years before a median even needs to be considered, and it may never
But
need to be
I'm just saying you
considered.
don't have that conflicting traffic coming directly from the other
Sure.
side.
Right.
so
Agreed.
Yeah.
that's
Agreed.
really
Yeah,
good.
at this time. Who knows what may happen later on too.
Yeah, well, I think it's a retention pond.
Yeah, it's a retention.
It is a
pond.
retention pond.
Well,
Yeah.
They can always.
They
There's
go away
one.
sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. They go away at
But,
times.
no, I think we're
Anyhow,
okay.
But yeah.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just make,
Ready, Andy?
to have them review that part.
Yeah, feel free if I make a mistake.
I think that's the biggest thing. That one needs to be reviewed on city council
Yeah.
side.
All right, so I'll go ahead and make a motion that we recommend approval of item 5.2 with, sounds like, with staff's recommendations, as well as 2 additional items to consider. One being some language to consider fencing or some type of positive separation between the school and this development. And the second recommendation, that they evaluate item 10.5 of the agreement to not restrict the ability to put in a raised median in the future if there are any safety concerns that may come up. And then also, they will want to consider what South Jordan may do as well, since they own half the street as well, and so they can do what they want there. Anything else? That's my motion.
Motion made by Andy,
I'll second.
second by Heather. We'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Brody?
Yes.
And thank you so much, guys. I know this feels painful sometimes. All right, we'll move on to item 5.3, consideration and recommendation of proposed amendments, to chapter 10.3 of City Code.
All right, so I'm going to get long-winded here, just so you're aware.
I've never noticed that.
Never not long-winded, right? So this next presentation kind of covers 5.3 till the end of the agenda, 5.7, 8, something like that. So this is just addressing the auto mall. They're proposing some text amendments to the Amsd Zone. and then they are proposing 4 separate MDAs to be considered as well. So, that being said, this is their proposal. So they're showing these 4 areas that are named Crescent, Garden Plots, north of Miller Crossing, and the Amsd Zone. Each of these will become its independent MDA and have, separate requirements and uses that are allowed and those kinds of things. And we'll get into the weeds here. So the first part of this is the text amendment dealing with the Amsd Zone. Going through it, I'll just highlight some of the things that we noticed, that they are removing some conditional uses, so they're providing anything that goes in as part of an Amsd zone will be a permitted use, which doesn't come back to the Planning Commission. There's a provision in the C1 and C2 commercial zones that if it's over an acre, it'll come back for Planning Commission for consideration. In this case, that doesn't happen. They have added some materials for buildings. They've set some front facade requirements, and then added the provision that the City Council can grant an exception to these materials at their discretion. In terms of parking, they've changed the parking requirement. Currently, we require 400 square feet of parking per 400 square feet of showroom. They've changed that requirement to 1 stall per 400 square foot of showroom. And then they've made some lighting amendments, and I'm going to be real honest, some of the language I didn't understand, so if you have questions, they would be the ones to talk to. They do include requiring some international dark sky requirements as well, and then having a 20-foot high LED light as a standard. In terms of landscaping, some of these are from the existing zone, like comply with the water efficient standards that would be required. They are reducing the front setback from 20 feet to 15 feet. When there's 100 feet of frontage, they can reduce the setback to 8 feet for 20 feet of length. That would be for a display area. Reducing the side yard from 10 feet to 5 feet. That would be something pretty typical in a commercial type of development. In a lot of our commercial zones, we don't have any side setback. Reducing the setback from Mountain View from 20 feet to 5 feet, and then reducing the street tree spacing from 30 feet to 60 feet. Again, this is only when sites develop as the Amsd zone, right? It also reduces the trees in the parking area from 1 per 1,000 square feet of parking to 1 per 4,000 square feet of parking display, and allows for clustering of trees. In terms of signage, all signs are permitted uses. This would, as we read it and understood it, it applies to both the C2 and the Amsd zone. And then it applies to the street frontages on state-owned corridors. So 126 South, Main Street, and then Harriman Auto Row. So they'd have to have at least 200 feet of frontage for that type of signage to take place. So these are the 3 sign types that they're proposing. Sign 1 would be out on Mountain View. There's 2 locations on Mountain View corridor, 75 feet tall, very typical of what you might see in an auto mall type of development. Sign 2 is 25 feet tall. There's 3 sign locations for that, more along Harriman Main Street, 126 South. And then kind of internal to the project, there would be 3 signs that are 12.5 feet tall, or I'm sorry, 4 signs that are 12.5 feet tall. And I think that this next graphic shows where those signs would be. So you can see where 1, 2, and 3 sign types would be located. Okay, so that's kind of an overview, a 30,000-foot overview, if you will, of the Amsd zone text amendments. Now we'll get into the individual MDAs. This first one is for the Crescent piece. We looked at this a while ago. This was proposed to be rezoned for residential, which was denied by the city. So now the proposal includes, so that it would be able to develop under the C2 zone uses, and then including these additional uses, right? New and used cars, boats, ATVs, RVs, motorcycles, water sport vehicles, and service centers for those dealerships, and it would allow enclosed and covered storage as an accessory use as well.
So real quick on that first bullet, the new used cars, boats, ATVs, that's not the selling, that's the storage. Is
That's
that
the
correct?
selling.
Selling as well.
Yes.
So
New-
you would
yeah.
have customers there as well.
New
Okay, I
used
just wanted to
cars,
clarify because.
Yeah, dealerships.
Thank
we're
you.
talking about. So dealerships and the storing of, right? So the storing of would be accessory to the dealership, just to clarify. Okay, so as I mentioned before, when a site develops with a C2 use, it will develop under the C2 zone standards. And then if a site develops under the Amsd zone, it would develop under those Amsd zone standards that we just went through. The next MDA area we'll look at is the garden plot. We just looked at the rezone for this maybe a month ago. It'll be good. That's going to the City Council on the 14th for final consideration. So this garden plot area will be entirely zone C2. And again, very similar uses to the Crescent piece. The one change would be the hotel motel, which is a conditional use in the C2 zone. And I think I get into that a little bit more. So the design standards, of course, C2 uses, C2 zone standards, Amsd zone uses, Amsd zone standards. In terms of the hotel motel, they are allowed, in the proposal, it allows for a height of 60 feet, but to be able to increase up to 90 feet. In the Amsd zone currently, I think the height is 55 feet with a provision to allow an additional 15 to go up to 70. So in speaking with the applicant, and maybe they can address this as well, it sounds like they only need to go up to 60 feet, and so that's what we're kind of suggesting, or recommending anyways, as an amendment to the MDA. And then allowing or requiring this setback, which is what we have in our C2 zones for anything that's adjacent to a residential. So where this garden plot has that residential development to the north, if a hotel locates there, it's 90 feet tall, we want it to be 90 feet from the property line, right? For every foot of height, you get a foot of setback from the residential development. All right, so the next area is north of Miller Crossing, and just north of the Amsd zone, and south of Anthem, we just saw, or I guess we spoke with the owners of that anyways. So the Amsd zone is the base zone here, and then these would be the additional uses that would be allowed. Some of these are commercial, and most of these are taken from the M1 zone. So you can see the light manufacturing, they'd be allowed to have some flex space, office warehouse, and retail in that area, as well as the Amsd zone uses. One provision they have in this MDA is in terms of timing. So no non-motor structures until 25,000 square feet of motor vehicle uses have permits. So that would be, and maybe they can address this, something I haven't thought of just till right now. Would that be just as part of the north of Miller Crossing area, or is that in the entire Amsd area, in the entire auto mall zone? So.
Well, aren't they independent MDAs? So
They are.
It would be north of Miller Crossing with how it's written then.
Yeah, and that would be my
So it
understanding
may
as well,
need to be
but-
adjusted if that's not their intentions.
Okay. In terms of design standards, again, Amsd zone uses, Amsd zone standards. Non-Amsd zone uses, they would fall into the M1 zone standards. The M1 zone standards do default for buildings to require the C2 architectural requirements, which is the 60% brick and stone. One provision that they are asking for is in terms of storage to exceed 6 feet when it's screened by additional trees.
Can I ask a question there? So and correct me if I'm wrong, so dealerships such as a Dodge dealership or Ford, they have a certain architectural standard that we found. Now, used dealerships do not.
Correct.
Okay, want to make sure. So, okay, I have an opinion on this one then.
Okay, and now we move on to the Amsd zone. Base zone is Amsd zone, of course. Permitted uses are those of the Amsd zone, and then they are adding the provisions for the service center, and then enclosed and covered storage is an accessory use. Design standards, so in the MDA it spells out when there's a franchise dealership, whatever the franchise proposes. So this would be for your, Ford, Toyota, Mitsubishi, whatever their franchise architecture is, the city will accept. And then non-franchise dealerships will be required to follow the Amsd Zone standards. They are providing some exemptions for the C2 zone standards that mostly take out any, most of the bike and pedestrian amenities, architecture, and the lighting requirements of that C2 zone. They will still provide, be required to provide the, ADA access to their buildings. But some of the, for example, one of the C2 zone requirements is when you have a site that's over 10 acres that develops commercially, you have to provide some kind of pedestrian amenity. That wouldn't be required in this instance. That being said, these are our recommended changes. Limit the hotel height to 60 feet. Specify the buffering from residential for the Amsd zone to match the C2 zone. And maintaining 30 feet straight tree spacing in the Amsd. And maintaining a 2-foot berm with reduced 15-foot setback along street frontages. However, allowing those berm and tree spacings to be altered along that main auto mall drive or auto road drive. So on that drive, they would have exceptions to not put in a berm and to have the 60-foot spacing, but they still would be required to put in the same number of trees that you would require for 30-foot spacing, but they could do that. They could cluster that. They could put somewhere else on the site. Those are the kinds of recommendations that we forward to the commission and council.
Glenn, do you mind taking just 1 minute before you move on and talk about impacted soil and what that is and what can be built on that, just to clarify?
I couldn't speak to that. I'm not proficient in impacted
Not quite?
soil.
Maybe Michael
But
maybe has some information on
Blake
that.
would probably-
Are you talking
There we
about the
go.
crescent piece?
I just wanted to share that.
On the crescent piece.
On the
So we can
crescent
talk
piece,
about it
right?
with the crescent piece. Just what is impacted soil, what can or cannot be built on it, et cetera.
The impacted soils are contaminated soils. They are identified in a study that was done in, I think, 1999. The study was done by the EPA. It was a record of decision, and it identified operable units, and this area was identified as operable unit 3, and the EPA gave the jurisdiction over those soils to Harriman City. And so with that, our ordinances and code allow for development if the contaminated soils are brought to a certain level, so cleaned up to a level, and then they have ways of testing it. So the ordinance does not restrict development, but it allows for a pathway to develop the property. It just has to be cleaned up to a certain level. And then the other side of that is the geotechnical report would identify what needs to be done to hold a structure such as a building or a parking lot on top of that soil. Does that answer your question?
So I mean, just to clarify, it has to be within a certain, I guess, parameters. And so that will be done no matter what before they build on that.
So those parameters for our ordinance are within what's acceptable to the EPA?
That's what has been negotiated, yes. So there are levels for, the two contaminants are lead and arsenic, and there's a non-residential level and a residential level. And I don't want to state them off the top of my head because I know I'll get them wrong, but there's a level, acceptable level for each one of those contaminants in non-residential and residential areas.
And that's according to the EPA.
And it's according to a range that was set by the EPA that allowed us to adopt. When Harriman Council did adopt that, they adopted the upper range.
Okay. Okay, just want to make sure that, I guess it's understood what impacted soil means.
And if anyone's interested, we can share the record of decision document with the commission or the council, whoever wants to read it. We'll be happy to share it. It's fantastic reading. It's about that thick, and
400 pages.
it'll help with insomnia.
It's like our packets every week.
But no, there's really good information in there about where the contamination came from.
Okay.
It was not Kennecott. It was the mine before Kennecott, all the mining that was going on up there.
Interesting.
And how soluble the contaminants are into things like food, and like if you're growing a garden or if you're drinking water that comes from the soil, which it's not very soluble at all. So that's why EPA gave the jurisdiction to Harriman, because it was a low risk.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good move, Clint. He sounded like an expert.
He's a lot smarter than we are, so.
I knew that.
He is an engineer, right? So.
Easy. Easy. All right. So we have seen this in our work session meeting. We've talked a little bit with the applicant on what they're proposing. I know that there have been some lengthy discussions with city administration and city council members. So our recommendation tonight would be for the city or for the Planning Commission to review these MDAs and this proposed text amendment, and then provide a recommendation tonight for any changes that you would like to see the city council to consider as part of their final decision. So that being said, like I said, I'm not an engineer, but I might be able to answer some questions you might have.
All right, I'm sorry.
Can you tell us about the International Dark Sky Association?
That's going to have to be on the applicant. I can't gotten into that much. See?
Okay.
0 for 1.
I had a question or two. So in the Amsd zone and then the M1 zone, it mentions cell phone towers. Do we have requirements for those? Like what they can look like, how tall they can be?
We don't have requirements for those. Something that could be considered would be to require a stealth application.
Okay.
My favorite has been the one at the school.
Mhm.
Looks like a bell tower.
Yeah.
We could do an auto dealership tower.
Just put it inside of the sign.
And you can incorporate it inside of the sign potentially.
Yeah.
Who
There you
knows?
go.
75 feet, it's tall enough.
And then I had one more real quick. On that 75-foot tall sign on Mountain View, is that the height that is allowed, or are we allowing higher for this sign?
So this would be a separate provision. I think currently the auto mall or the Amsd zone allows a sign, I want to say it's 55 feet tall.
Okay.
We did a text amendment for that
overlay
Mountain View
zone
corridor.
Yeah, for like leaves.
And I think we allowed it up to 45 feet tall above the,
How tall are the Real ones?
I'm sorry?
How tall are the Real signs that we have?
Oh, I think those are 75 feet.
Okay.
So this would be, of course, this is the applicant's proposal to have those signs go up to 75 feet.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
I got a couple right.
Thank you. If the applicant's here or representative, if you want to just state your name.
Of course, Mr. Chairman, Bruce Beard, I'm counsel for the project. Could you put up our slides? Thanks.
My email, Dustin.
But while we're getting those up, I first want to thank the staff. As Clinton mentioned, we've worked really, really hard with the staff and city council and working groups with the city council and you folks over the last 6 months or so. We recognized that there were some things in the old AMSD that just didn't work anymore for automobile dealers. For example, you couldn't have used. We understood why the city didn't want used vehicle dealerships, because a lot of used vehicle dealerships are, what's the word I'm looking for? Ugly.
Their trailer parked on the lot.
Yes, and I usually say, the one I usually say is South State Street, about 56 South, and everybody laughs because we all know what I'm talking about. It used to be a 7-Eleven or something, and that's the dealership, and it looks like crap. So modern dealership, we said, look, we're going to have automobile dealers that are used car dealers, but they're going to be good. And then we had to deal with some of the facts that some of your existing rules in the AMSD no longer worked for modern dealerships, for example. Some of the standards that you wanted to impose on franchise dealers, they just won't do. So we wanted to try and square the circle, so we created, and I'm going to start with AMSD because that's how our thought process started. Our standards would be, if it's national, like Mercedes or Ferrari, hell, South Jordan's got a Lamborghini dealership or a Bentley dealership. Yeah. And those people are really, really strict about it. So if it's that, then we're going to allow those. If it's a used car dealer, then we're going to make them build a nice used car dealership. So we took your existing standards and tweaked them a little bit, but not much, to make them apply to used car dealerships.
we then looked at some of the other stuff. For example, the parking requirement that you had was just about 10 times more than reality that any dealership had. I mean, it would create a monstrous parking field with no cars in it, and that just didn't make any sense. So we went to other cities, we went to other functioning car dealerships and automobile areas, and we looked at it and we said, okay, what works and what doesn't work in reality? For example, we had provisions with trees. Well, trees are not necessarily a good thing in terms of car inventory because, I don't know, birds sit in trees and birds poop on cars. So we tried to arrange the landscaping differently. We took a look at the setbacks, for example, from the main streets and realized that car dealers don't want their first row of cars in the dealership to be against that back wall. They want their cars to be where people can see them on the road because that's how people buy them. So I'm just picking a few of these. We took a comprehensive look at what worked and what didn't work in terms of design standards, and then we looked at signage, what modern auto mall dealerships use for entry signs, gateway signs, monument signs, and we tried to graft all this through, and we did it in conjunction, as I say, with staff and also with dealerships, some of which we already have under contract. And the reason we're looking for, as Clint said at the end, a recommendation tonight is we're on a fast track. We have dealers ready to go. And then we realized as part of AMSD, look, we've got some of this AMSD infrastructure may be paid for by PIDs, public infrastructure improvement districts. We need development on the other properties owned by the same entity to support the PID infrastructure. And some of those other dealerships wanted to be in somewhat cheaper locations, for example, as a satellite location. That's why Crescent has got a dealership in it, because we have somebody who wants to put something there, but they couldn't, based on their product, they really couldn't afford to put it in the high-end automobile district property. So we took a look at the other 4 properties and said, okay, the other 3 properties, and said, okay, we're going to run this as a package. How do we do it? So what we did was we said, okay, we've got automobile, AMSD, and we're fixing AMSD. So how do we deal with the next area is north of Miller. Let me, and if I'm missing something, I apologize. I'm going to go through it, as I say, quickly without going through the details. I can give you as much details as these slides have. I just hate reading. Slides. PowerPoints are terribly ineffectual. So I promise you I will never read the slide. We can put up the next slide if you would, just so I'm going to run through it. I'll leave it up for like...
There's a clicker
it's
for
the
you.
Clicker? You got the clicker? Okay, which clicker is it? There we go. Is that one? Okay, that's the clicker. So this is the automall, and we've got south of Miller. It's 50 acres, yada, yada. We've got a lease already ready to go. That's the what used to be Larry H. Miller, Mr. Generous kind of thing. So again, we've talked about that. Then we're going to go to, these are the changes. You've gone, and you can read them on your screens. You can read them a lot faster than I'll talk. I mentioned the difference between new and used. We also needed to make clear about service and storage, and we talked about the design standards. So let me stay on this for just a second. What we decided to do is, in consultation again with your city attorney, your city manager, and staff, was to implement these by way of 2 things. Number 1 was a zone change, a text to change to the zone, and number 2 was an MDA to lock it in. Now this is not your typical MDA where you're doing a long-term residential project or other development project in multiple phases where you know what the site plans are going to be. The reason this is here is more like what I would call a zoning agreement. But the state law of Utah recognizes development agreements as the vehicle to lock in zoning for vesting. So we went with a development agreement methodology because that's what the state law provides for. So the MDA is essentially a lot of boilerplate with one or two key provisions, and the primary key provision is that the AMSD as adopted stays in place for 15 years. And the reason for that is because that's the top, well, multiple reasons. One is that that's the clock for the PID, and you need that assurance to keep the PID, to be able to sell the PIDs. The second reason is because the tenants who are buying in want to be sure that their property, their automobile dealership is going to be next to a similarly designed automobile dealership, and they don't get the rug pulled out from under them. And the third reason is the city gets the assurance that the rug is not going to be pulled out from under the city. So that's why we have this as a zoning agreement masquerading as a master development agreement with the standard boilerplate that protects the city. And you've seen, the city has seen this template before. Pardon me, did somebody have some water? I got it. Did I bring my water there? Horrible cold, but it's not transmitted. My doctor assures me, A, it's not COVID and gave me a PSA test, and B, he says it's not transmissible. So, but if I start hacking up a hairball, you'll have to pardon me for about a minute because it really sounds gross. And talking does it, so I'm going to try and talk quickly. So that's why we're doing the AMSD, and that's why we're doing the MDA to back up the AMSD. And then what we realized was most of these other areas that we're talking about.
Bruce, can I stop you for a half a second,
Sure,
just because
Mr.
it's on this slide? Will you talk about the dark sky compliance, just because it was a question earlier?
Yes. Yes, the dark sky compliance. The funny thing is there's various versions of dark sky ordinances. I've run them all the way from the National Park Service's version in Yosemite, which is basically you light a match and you're violating the dark sky ordinance. So we looked around for standards and we found a group, it's the International Dark Sky Association, if I remember right, and it's kind of a standard setting body that sets that reviews the current state of the art. And rather than trying to put those standards in here line by line by line by line, we just simply incorporated them as a reasonable standard, and we'll comply with that reasonable dark sky standard.
Okay.
And essentially it is to keep a lot of the uplight from getting up into the skies.
Right.
Above.
Yeah,
It
it's just
keeps it all down.
The
It
light
just
is all
controls it.
directed downwards,
Yep.
it's shielded, it turns off at certain times as, as necessary. I mean, you got to keep it on for security, but no more than security. It's a certain number of lumens. You try to keep it off of the neighboring
Adjacent
property.
properties.
So and we thought of this immediately and voluntarily. I want to be clear, the city did not, quote, force this on us. When we sat down, we went, okay, what is a reasonable thing to do to offer the city? And we went out and found this, with the help of the city, we found the standard, and that's why it's there. We don't want more light pollution than we have to have. So we then went to the area that I'm going to call north of Miller, because that's a little bit different. North of Miller has been zoned AMSD, and you've seen the maps, so you know where it is. It's basically north of Miller. And the only real change here is we call this AMSD plus. And as Clint mentioned, it allows a certain amount of, it allows non-AMSD uses that are still quality type uses if we can't sell it for AMSD. Now, the question you raised, Mr. Chairman, earlier is, where does the 25,000?
You answered it on the right in the green.
It's exactly in the green. It's any part of AMSD, not just AMSD North. So once we get to 25,000 square feet, and that's a lot of a building. We actually patterned this off of the DAI agreement on 118th South for the storage units versus the North office area. So we used that as a template to put this provision in here. I literally cloned that provision into this document and just made the necessary changes to it. So it basically says we cannot do non-auto uses until we've built the 25,000 square feet in any of the AMSD, in the AMSD zone. So Once we do that, then we can build the non-uses. And so we added this additional.
So can I ask clarity on that? Because based on how it looks with the map, the Amsd zone is really just the one area, and then there's the north of Miller Crossing, then there's the Crescent, then there's the Garden.
Right.
So that's just the one area that you're referencing as the Amsd zone for the 25,000 square foot, or is it all four of them?
Well, it's actually the intent, I believe, and I'm going to make sure I'm wrong, is not wrong. The intent is that it's in AMSD or north of Miller. Right. Yeah, north of Miller is currently zoned.
Because I remember the auto zone, and that was all in that area.
North of Miller, and actually the other parcel, the weird parcel that we don't own, the game point parcel,
yeah.
that's also zoned AMSD. So basically, in anything that's
that's C2.
That's right. We'd have to change that one. I'm sorry. Because we do have a provision in the development agreement that says that if we acquire that parcel, only that parcel, and after acquired parcel, then it automatically becomes zoned AMSD.
Thank you, Bruce.
But we've limited that. So basically, once we get to 25,000 square feet of auto in any of the property that you're seeing on the screen, then we're freed up to use these additional uses if we want to. And frankly, we'd rather do Automall because it pays better. But if we can't sell it after those 25,000, well, we'll have to put something there because you just don't want it vacant. So that's AMSD plus on north of Miller. Then this is Crescent, and I understand there may be some people here from the neighborhood to talk about Crescent. As Blake and Clinton pointed out, this is developable for all C2 uses, literally all C2 uses, and some of them can be quite intrusive, but we could do those as a matter of right, and we're trying to not do some of those. You can see that what we've agreed to on Crescent is we've taken out a bunch of uses that we could do as a matter of right, including a resource recycling collection point, a charter school with all of its traffic, an elementary school with all of its traffic, several other things that would be very intrusive. We've taken those out, and instead we've added what we call C2 plus, and we've put in the new and used car dealerships based from AMSD, and we do have the AMSD amended design standards to control it, including the lighting and everything else. So that's why we think it's a good use. A long time ago, as you know, we'd have rather done residential, but a whole bunch of people stood up and said they didn't want residential. So we came back in and said, okay, we want commercial. We actually
is there still a plan to move some of that soil over to the larger piece?
It's going to be moved in, I don't know, I can tell you this, I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but it's going to be moved in compliance with the so-called
It's going to meet the standard.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. We have to, as a matter of federal law and state law and city law, we have to move it in a certain manner to certain locations. And I've done a bunch of these. I've done hundreds of thousands of yards of various levels of contaminated material. Yeah. Sometimes you have to move it all the way to Tooele. Sometimes you can just spread it and it
mix it in,
and it goes away. Like if you got a leaking underground storage tank, the resolution for that is you just lay it out and eventually it evaporates. But each of these materials have their own storage requirements, and you have to test them as you go. And if you run into a hot spot, you have to deal with a hot spot in a different way than you have to deal with what you expected. But it's tested all the way through until completion.
And another point on this is you're not going to be building on top of the large berm that's there, right? Your intent is to get that down so that you're not.
We're going to take out everything we have to take out and nothing more than what we have to take out. And if we over-X, then we're going to have to do geotech studies on the engineered fill to make it so that they can put it in. So that's what we have to do. I can't tell you as I sit here today how deep it's going to go.
But you're not going to be building on the berm. I know that's some concerns, I think, from some of the residences. It's not going to be elevated development on top of those, right? You're going to get it down to street level. Yeah,
I don't think it's going to go to street level, but we're going to take it down as much as we have to, but no more than we have to.
Okay.
And then Bruce.
Yes,
with-
sir.
With this, it's talking about enclosed storage, covered storage, and open storage.
Yes.
This is just for auto. You're not talking about we're building a storage unit here.
No, sir. These are simply as accessory uses. You're correct. These
Okay.
are accessory uses only, so they're related to the primary use on the property. These are not just storage sheds where anybody who wants to can come in and bring whatever crap they've got in their garage and just leave it there permanently.
We may want just a little clarity on how that was written, Clint.
Yeah, we're happy
Just on
to
the
work.
last one.
We're happy to work with your attorney and your
Yeah,
staff.
as long as it's written to where it's clear about that, because right now it looks like it could be any storage.
Car storage or
Yeah,
some-
I think it's okay because I think the way we fixed it, Mr. Chairman, is I think we said it's got to be accessory to.
Allowed as accessory uses. Yeah.
So it can't be
Accessory
primary.
uses,
it
that
can't be
means it's got
primary
to be
use.
related to the
Yep,
primary use.
as long as it's written like that, I'm good with it.
I think we're okay, but we're happy to have, to work with any more clarity that
Yeah.
you or the council wants in getting this done.
I think if it's needed, of course.
So that's Crescent C2. And then we go to garden plots. And if somebody can tell, I mean, I got $5 in my pocket. If somebody can tell me why these are called garden plots, I'm happy to give it to them. Whoever can tell me why it's called garden plots, I don't have a clue.
I've only seen animals on it, so I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm literally willing to pay $5 if somebody will elucidate me as to what that is.
Lunch money.
And this is a weird one because we originally started trying to make this a while ago something else, and the city came to us about 3 months ago and said, hey, we've got somebody who wants to put a hotel on there. And our response was, thank you very much. We're happy to put a hotel on there, but the zone doesn't allow it. But if you want to tell us what your hotel is, and so we went and worked, and we also, I think we wound up with not the same one that the city brought us, but we wound up with PSAs for, this is the uses, the PSA with the Zions on the corner and Goodyear Tire on the west of it, and the Woodside Suites Hotel. Were we supposed to name that? I didn't. Too late. I looked up and went, oh, shoot. We weren't supposed to name that hotel, so I'm going to get rid of that slide. Anyway, we have a PSA with a good hotel operator for that site. So what we've done is we've put in C2 plus again. And the C2 plus again are uses from AMSD, just in case, because it's a great revenue use, it's a wonderful corner, and it might be an overflow. So we put in the same basic C2 uses, and we put in the hotel uses. I would, and again, this is, feel free to make whatever recommendation you want to the city. I don't know that we need 90 feet of a hotel on that site, but we might. And if we get a 90-foot hotel on that site and we set it back adequately, whatever that turns out to be, I think it's in everybody's best interest in the city of Harriman to have a really nice hotel. And it's my experience, unfortunately traveling a whole bunch of nights a year, that generically, if you get an 8-story hotel, it's a higher quality hotel than a 4-story hotel or a 5-story hotel.
And then if you get tired of one of these meetings, Bruce, you have a place to stay.
You know, I've asked Wendy that for a long time, and Wendy told me where a bar was, because I said I'd want to go to a bar after one of these meetings, and then I don't want to drive home after I've been drinking. So we've been trying to get a hotel on some of these projects. So we disagree with the staff recommendation on the height, and I think they're being excessive on the setback. But, you know, whatever recommendation you want to make to the city council, we're happy with it. Again, we have we have MDAs for each of those Crescent, north of Miller, and garden plots. But again, those MDAs are really zoning agreements just to lock it in for the same reasons we talked about before. 95% of these MDAs is just the boilerplate that I've worked on with the various members of your city staff, your city attorney, your city managers over literally the last 14 years. So I think this will be the 6th or 7th one of these basic template boilerplate MDAs that the city has done. If there's any questions, I will try to get them right. If not, I'll call on my experts to see. And then by the rest of the way, the team is Trey and Heather and Julie. They let me do the talking, I guess. So if you got any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, we'd be happy to take a chance afterwards to respond to whatever the residents say after that. And I thank you, as
Absolutely.
always, for your attention all the times I've been to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Bruce. And just so you know with how the procedure will go, so I'll open the public comment. You will have a chance to come back up after that.
Yes, sir.
We have public comment for each individual one. I'm going to try to keep it to where if they want to talk about Crescent, that they come up during the Crescent one, so we keep it relevant and make it a little bit easier.
Why don't I just reserve my rebuttal to after all of them, if that's
Yep.
okay with you?
Yep, we can do that.
Thank you very much.
We'd have to make a motion though on each one before we move to the next. So we wouldn't need him to come.
Hey, Bruce, and Adam didn't, or Andy did make a point that we probably will want you to come up if someone comes up for a specific one, because
You just tell me
because
how to
we'll
do it,
make a
and I'll-
motion
You
after
tell me how to
that.
do it.
We'll have to entertain motions after each hearing, so.
All right. So we do have this item on for a public hearing. This is a consideration and recommendation of proposed amendments in Chapter 10.31 of City Code, AMSD Auto Mall Special District. And so we'll open the public hearing. I just want to go through one thing as we go through this. So we will go, if you don't have it in front of you, I want to make sure I get the order right. So it's the AMSD, then it's the north of Miller Crossing.
This
And-
one's 5.3.
Yes, this is 5.3, so this is before that.
Yes.
And so, and then after that, we'll go to the AMSD specifically, and then the north of Miller, and then the Crescent parcel, and then the last one is the garden plots. And so all of these are open for public hearings. So if there's one specific one you want to speak about, it makes it a little bit easier for us to keep it relevant to that specific one. And then if you weren't here earlier, it's 3 minutes for an individual. So we'll look at opening the public hearing for item 5.3.
Hi, my name is Dustin Thatcher, and I live on Moreno Way, right across from the Crescent development. Doing the auto mall, me and my wife are concerned about the too much light, possibly. I know he already discussed that a little bit, where they're mitigating that. So that's good, but also was concerned about, possible increase in crime maybe from it. And I know that a lot of kids walk to and from school. Don't know if that would be an issue as, traffic is going in and out of the auto mall. But, I think me and my wife would probably still be well, we're against the auto mall, and I know a few neighbors that are against the auto mall from being right across the street there. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. Seeing no other comments, we'll close the public hearing on item 5.3 and then turn to the Planning Commission, or if Bruce has some more to share.
2 seconds, not even that.
And just official, we did close the public hearing, so.
I would point out, I'm just going to address one of the questions that the gentleman raised. I would point out that based on my experience with several car dealerships, they're the most safe and secure place you can get because it's a massive amount of inventory, and there's a lot of security running around that inventory to make sure that it's not damaged. So that security is a presence that will help the whole neighborhood because it's an active eyes on the street presence. It'll reduce crime, not increase crime.
So quick question on the lighting. He had the question on the lighting as well.
Right.
And I just want you to have that opportunity to address that
Yeah, I
also. My
appreciate it.
understanding is those requirements that you talked about, the dark sky requirements do mitigate the trespassing that would be
Yes, they
happening and get into adjacent.
They absolutely do. You're limited to the number of feet, lumens. I mean, it's a complicated set of measurements, but you can't call them invisible. I'm not going to be disingenuous, but they are as unintrusive as they can be. And by the way, this version of AMSD is much less intrusive than the current version of AMSD, and also much less intrusive than the current version of C2.
And that lighting, will it be all night long as well because of security?
It will be I think the way we wrote it, it will be the minimum required for security purposes
outside of business hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
You can sit down, Bruce, but one item that, oh no, you can sit down. One item just for discussion here, guys, and that I thought about with this, is I know I talked about some landscaping, other things like that, and I'll bring it up in this one, even though it may be relevant to each individual one. But the potential of the crescent and the garden plot, the one thought that did come to mind with the landscaping is larger trees on the north side of both of those properties as a buffer. And then it would also be on the east side of the crescent one, in between houses. And obviously Bruce has a thought on this one too.
No, we're going to say yes.
Yes, and so that's the one thing that I know can provide a buffer that will help as well.
Yeah.
So that needs to be a recommendation if it's not in there already. We have 3 more public hearings if you want to come up at one of those. It's not a question answer period during this. Usually you give comments, you usually get it answered, but it's just a period for you to. We'll let
You'll
you
have
come.
more opportunity.
All right, with that being said, is there additional comments on this item? Or are you ready to make a motion?
On the crescent piece,
We're not talking
We're not
about
talking
yet.
about
This is the text change for Auto Mall.
oh, gotcha, I'm good with
Yeah,
that.
so, yeah, we got to keep it straight on our end as well. This is just the text change for the AMSD.
So I have a question on one of the new uses. One of them was vehicle storage, and I just want to clarify that it wouldn't be used for like a wrecking, like wrecked cars.
No, that would be, so it would be solely for an accessory use to the dealership.
Yeah.
But yeah, you couldn't have a wrecked auto.
But would,
Thank you, Clint.
I guess the question is though, could you have like RV storage? Because that would be considered an accessory
If we
to
had
an
RV
RV
dealership.
If it's a
An
dealership,
RV.
Any,
Right, but could they have an RV storage lot next to an RV dealership?
If it's their RVs, yes.
right, if it's accessory to their main use of the,
It's not for a third party to come in and store their RVs on.
not,
Yeah, RVs
maybe,
can't
maybe
just make
Bruce
it a
can
storage
provide some
lot.
clarification on that. It doesn't, maybe it didn't specify.
But that is,
Right,
a-
it
that
just-
is a
it just says an
recommendation with that to
accessory-
clarify.
An accessory to the dealership,
It just says an
not,
accessory
yeah.
thing. So we just need to make clarifications.
As we make a recommendation to city council, we probably want to make sure that legal clarifies that and makes it
Yep.
clear
I like
that
that.
they can't use it for other purposes that are outside of that
Yeah.
specific.
Just thinking also, so most dealerships have auto body repair. So how will those wrecked cars be stored?
Happy to.
It,
About that. We'd be happy to agree to storage, to screening requirements for any storage for something like that. That's not an issue. If we need to put that in, we're happy to consider that.
Okay.
Yeah, do we need to just, yeah, I guess think through that piece if they are doing repairs or kind of like Larry H. Miller, you can go there and have auto work done, even though it's a dealership.
Well, and besides the screening, probably make sure that it's a surface that like leaking oils and things like that aren't going to go into the.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
those
they have
requirements.
requirements
Those
on those.
requirements are there as well, already.
But if we're happy to put in a provision that says if it's a auto body of the kind of thing, we can put a screening around it. That's not an issue. But
Okay.
of course, there will be, people drive in at night and drop their cars off for service and they pick them up later. So
Yeah.
that happens as a matter of course. But I honestly, I don't think we'd ever thought about your issue about the wrecked cars in the Autobahn, and that looks like a junkyard effect, we're happy to fix that. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
And I have two things, because I guess this is kind of the overall AMSD. On 10-31-7A, it basically states that if certain design standards, including but not limited to building materials, colors, glazing, sizes, signage, lighting, setbacks, or heights are mandated by the national or international manufacturer on a franchised dealership, then those design standards shall be deemed approved by the city. I'm a little concerned with that just because it basically says that they can do whatever they want if there's a international or national
Carvana?
franchisee.
I'm not
Carvana
worried
has
about
that
that at
tall
all
building.
with new
Right.
dealerships.
Yeah.
It's used dealerships, but they should not have the,
Well,
that
that's-
should not be relevant.
But
to
that's
used
relevant though, because
dealerships.
there's used dealerships that are national used dealerships.
And I'm going to let Bruce answer this one just because I
The
think.
answer is, we looked at that issue. We specifically looked at that issue and couldn't find any. But the way it's written, it's only dealing with new are exempt. We actually, somebody mentioned the.
You had one of your slides that said that too, that it was new only, and then if it said something that.
It's new only.
It was
but-
AMSD standards, except for new franchises that were then the
That's correct.
franchise standards.
But
I do
weirdly
remember
enough,
seeing
we
that.
actually, somebody brought up a question of what about, I can't remember the name of the place in Sandy. It's National Auto Plaza. Somebody brought up National Auto Plaza and said, well, wouldn't we be happy with National Auto Plaza here because it looks somewhat similar to a new dealership? And we spent some time researching whether we could find a similar type of national version of a used car dealership that was high-end quality enough that we thought it should maybe be exempt from your normal design standards. We couldn't find one, so we're not asking for one.
So maybe all we do here on this one is we just clarify that that's for new dealerships.
Well,
Yeah.
and
Right?
I
That-
think
That used needs to follow the,
I know a slide clarified
Well,
it, but I don't know if it's clear.
but it's not
in
clear in here.
Yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't
okay,
specifically
I'm
say.
gonna take it one step further.
What?
I'm just gonna go a step
There's
further.
a ghost in here.
I think that we should still have the city's design standards, be applicable, because even with a new dealership, like if you've got a BMW dealership, I've seen some in Georgia that are 80 feet tall. I mean, they're these massive buildings, and so to not have any kind of input at all, and that the city's just going to accept whatever is deemed approved by the actual manufacturer of the vehicles.
Well,
I think that is a
If I
road
didn't,
we don't want to go down.
if I didn't have an uncle that ran a Dodge dealership, I would totally agree with you. But the standards of these dealerships, in order to be able to have a dealership, are really, really high. And so they do have more glass and more,
So maybe
there's
we
other
just say
things
that
there.
they need to
But a
meet
new
or
dealership
exceed.
has a very, very high standard. And I wish we actually had a copy of one.
Pictures, we have some pictures of.
Yeah, I wish we had a copy of one sort of for us to read because it's actually pretty high.
No, and I understand, like, the materials wise and, whether it's a modern design or
Are we giving Bruce 3
pugilistic
minutes?
design or whatever it is. I'm more concerned that the city doesn't have any input at all, and we may get something that we just don't want. And then if we don't have any say at all,
Well, as it is.
I'm not saying materials wise, because I think you're right. I think those standards, like the actual materials wise, may be great, but it may not be a design that we want. Now, these are very all low profile ones.
There's no car dealerships that are 80 feet tall. Not
Oh, yeah,
car-
yeah.
There just aren't. I mean,
There
it's
actually
okay.
is.
It's okay.
In Georgia, just on its way down to South Carolina, down, what is it, 95? You go down 95, and there's like 8 dealerships all in a row, right outside of Hilton Head, and all of them are massive. massively tall.
I think if there was one that was coming in that was 80 feet tall, it would be a little different process coming through, though.
Well, that's the point, is that
And
there
I
is
think
no-
I think
there
that
is no process.
I think in this case, Forrest, I don't think an 80-foot tall one is relevant to what we're talking about right now. And that's the thing that I think we need to keep in mind is we need to keep it relevant to what we potentially will see, because there's also a seven mile radius. So we have like 3 or 4 new dealerships that can't even come here. And
Right.
so
Well,
there's
and
lots
I
of standards
understand
like that.
But my point is, and especially as we are kind of formulating these MDAs, you do not want to put yourself in a position where you don't have input.
Mr. Sickles, can I give you a kind of a version that I've done in other cities before?
Sure.
And I have no authority to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And this was, and what I did is, in Saratoga, we were trying to get a development agreement for like 1,800 units, and a city council member said, don't you have any flexibility at all? And I said, well, Emma, I can go down, I don't have any authority to do this, but if my clients won't agree to go 1,799 feet, 9 units, then I'll fire them as clients. So you won't be surprised when she said, we'll go to 1,799 units, and that was their motion. I don't have authority, but if you make it 49 feet tall, we're going to be okay. But it's just not a reasonable thing. When you look at this area of town, it's next to a freeway. It's generically not next to any human. If you want to put the new car dealerships as a standard in, say, Crescent, or that may make some sense to put a height restriction in Crescent. I haven't talked about it, but to put it in the AMSD or north of Miller, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it may make sense to make a recommendation that there be some kind of design standard review on a height basis in Crescent. And I think we're probably going to be, I think we'd be okay with that. I'm getting nods from the back. So if you want to put some thou shalt not exceed 80 feet in Crescent, we're cool. But in AMSD, it shouldn't be there.
No, and I understand that. I guess my issue is cutting the city out of all decisions.
We couldn't figure out how to make it a little less than pregnant, to be blunt in the old phraseology, because once you've got that intrusiveness, then the design, the franchise is less likely to come there, because it's going to take them a long time to get through a process. The process may not be definitive. You don't know how you're going to get done. They want certainty before they sign the PSA and bring the dealership in.
I appreciate your input, Bruce, and I appreciate your input, Forrest. I think at this point, is there additional?
I do have an additional thing, sorry.
Okay, nope, you're good.
So the other item that I have is the signage. We worked hard on the signage kind of text just over the last couple of months, and it seems like we're throwing just that out, kind of going a totally different direction than what we had agreed on as a city. And so I think that's my concern.
I guess for this one, it's a unique situation. We need to make sure we have proper signage for all of the, before we had to limit the number of signs and things like this, but this application, if you're going to have a dozen or so, different.
I think from a
dealerships, you gotta-
dealership perspective, you advertise. And Mountain View is the mode of their advertisement, and the signage makes the most sense. For at least me personally, I think the signage makes sense.
Can I explain a bit about the process of how we got here? We knew that your signage ordinance was going at the same time, and we didn't know who would get ahead of which. And we actually got into the position of, well, your signage ordinance moved faster than we did, so we weren't ready to bring this into you to put it into the signage ordinance. Otherwise, we would have come to you and had it in the signage ordinance at the time. So we were sort of literally, and Mike's laughing because that's exactly right. We had this exact discussion 4 times. Is the Planning Commission going to be unhappy that we're proposing this after their signage ordinance? Well, it's too late to get it into the signage ordinance.
I remember a couple years back when we went through the signage for the overlay zone for Real, and sporting facility, I think is how it was worded for signage. And I remember we went through it, and it was a couple good months. And the product that was brought before us, in the end, served a purpose for our community. And I think in this case, based off of that prior experience, that this signage serves a benefit to our community. And so for me, it seems like a worthwhile sign to place where we're looking at it and what size.
And that's
so
why we were
that's
very-
that's where I stand on it. Granted, there's other individuals here.
And that's why we were very, very, very specific about it. These signs only apply in these specific locations and nowhere else.
And I looked at those locations as well, and I thought they were appropriate. It's not going to be blocking view of vehicles turning in and out of the developments and things like that. I think the
And
location are
just to
appropriate.
clarify that all the spots are AMSD, or it's a Long Mountain View.
Long
Okay.
Mountain View, that's right.
There's a map of where they are.
Yeah, we saw that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there isn't going to be the Style 1 sign
On Crescent?
on
is that-
Crescent or on Garden or, because they're in those same
Zones.
MDAs.
But it's specified where those locations are.
that map
Yeah.
specifies.
There are absolutely stone cold specified locations
that's just this-
each type of the sign.
Because that's the only spot
That's the only spot those are going.
No,
Not going to the
it's
others.
in the other MDAs as well.
It is, but it just tag along because those sites are not in Crescent.
And see, and that's my, I just want to
There you
make
go.
sure that we're covering all our bases.
Yeah.
No, that's
You know what I
fine.
mean? And we want to make
These are the
sure
sign
that
locations
we're
right
getting,
here.
you know,
Yeah, and you're
exactly
not
what-
looking to do these in others, even though it may not, I guess his concern is, I don't want to speak
Oh, like
again
on
for you.
Crescent?
It's not specifically outlined in
you're
the
saying.
other
We
MDAs.
can delete, we can make, we will.
We just need to
sure-
make sure that when we get to those MDAs, maybe we just put that in the motion.
Yeah, we'll
then
make
for
it
those.
absolutely
Yeah, I
clear
agree.
that those signs are not going to go in those other
Yeah,
locations.
yeah, we can put that as a part of the
So
motion.
we
for
could
those
probably
specific-
easily say signage city standard for Garden and for Crescent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, that
Okay,
works.
thank you. Thank you, Forrest.
No, that's good clarified.
Yeah, no, that
Let's
was.
not leave it to interpretation.
Do you have another one, Forrest?
I have a few more. I'm sorry.
On 5.3, or is it relevant to the other ones?
Well, I'm going to say it's relevant to the other ones.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, then do we want to look for a motion on item 5.3? Or is there more discussion to be had? I'm good either way.
No, what all we need to make sure is included, I guess was my old boy.
So for me, it was just screening the wrecked cars.
Screening the wrecked cars, and then the signing will handle in the individual. Does that sound?
Yeah.
So that's the only one we have then, that we want to clarify?
Well, on this, isn't it accessory use, meaning that?
Clarification.
Clarification there.
Accessory use is,
Landscaping on the north side of Crescent and the Garden, and then screening requirement for any repair work facilities, were the three that I wrote down. And then if it needs to be written in this one, I'm not opposed to it being brought up on this one because I think it could
Yeah.
be relevant. Just that signage, with the exception to our city standards, is only relevant to the north and AMSD zone, and not, city standard would be relevant to Crescent and Garden. Does that sound about right? Did I miss something?
Is this a spot where we would request a stealth?
Or do we need to add those into one of the other ones?
No, you got it. I think you could even limit the signage to the AMSD north of Miller. They're not proposing any signs north of Miller.
so that's not in their development agreement, so we
Yeah.
should probably mention.
According to this map that is being shown here,
Yeah.
all of the signage is in that AMSD zone.
Okay.
Okay.
Chris, did you get that too, about the cell phone towers?
So what's the
The
question?
stealth requirement?
The stealth.
Oh, if they put,
Cell phone.
Yes.
So additional to the cell phone towers, they're only allowed on public or quasi-public property. So in the one zone, and they have to be that. So I don't know if there's going to be any
Yeah, that'd be a school
publicly owned property.
or,
So keep that in mind too.
Okay.
the one little UDOT stretch could have one, right?
The UDOT
The little UDOT
parcel.
one parcel, but that's not relevant to this.
We're in the process of purchasing that property right now.
And then it'd be relevant to that one if we own it as a
Could
city.
be, yeah.
Okay. But that's not relevant to this. Okay. So I don't know if we need to add that.
Okay, thanks.
Who wrote those down?
I did.
I know.
We were all waiting for you to write this down.
Here. Screening requirement
All right, hold on.
for any
Jeez
repair
Louise, screening requirement.
work buildings, I guess.
Yeah.
Landscaping on the north side of garden and I think you need to put a tree requirement for sort of coverage between the residential and the commercial uses.
There isn't any residential and commercial.
There is on garden.
On Crescent.
and Crescent.
Yes, but we're not talking about those right now.
Well, this is going in the,
Yeah,
USD.
yeah, this is everything.
okay.
So just want to be
And
sure.
then accessory use.
They have a question, I think.
Oh, yes.
I just want some more clarification on the tree requirement. So the way that we presented it is that it would follow the C2 zones. Are you asking for additional trees to be located
So I am with
there?
this, just because if you have a 60-foot hotel, those individuals are looking straight down into their houses.
Right.
And so if we put a tree requirement, and then obviously they don't have to be 30 feet tall when you plant them, but trees that grow taller has more coverage between the two uses on that. And then probably something similar between the homes and the other one. It'd be lighting for the other area probably a little bit.
I think the spacing right now for a C2 zone is 20 feet. So if you were wanting taller
Probably need
trees,
to
you're
be
probably going to want more spacing as well.
Okay. So,
Just something,
so how's the best way to word that, Clint?
however you want to.
Don't say that.
I mean, so this is a recommendation. You could just recommend that. the
These are all
city council
recommendations, obviously.
Consider allowing or requiring taller trees with increased spacing adjacent to residential.
To help with coverage from the uses. Okay. Does that help,
Yes,
Andy?
yeah. Yes, I'm used to saying yes.
And then the signage was the
Signage.
last one.
Thank you, signage.
The signage is only applicable to the AMSD zone and not the north or the crescent or garden, since they pretty much show us where the signs are going.
All right. Any other discussion?
That was
All right.
only items that I remember. If there's something else we missed, please help.
Yeah, we can talk about height on the others. All right, I would like to make a motion that we recommend approval of item 5.3 with staff's recommendations with 4 additional recommendations. The first one being we require screening for any vehicle repairs that are taking place on those sites, that the city council consider providing or requiring taller and tighter spacing of trees that will be a buffer between the residential and
I think
the
Clint
commercial.
recommended farther spacing. because
Oh,
they'd be
farther
taller-
spacing.
Taller trees, right?
Taller trees for larger spacing, excuse me. Got that? Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. And then third item, that the accessory use, clarification that the accessory use for the storage is associated with the specific development that is happening on those sites. And then the fourth recommendation that the signage as presented here, the deviation from the signage is only applicable to the AMSD zone and not for the north, the crescent, or the garden zones.
Great.
That's my recommendation.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion made by Andy and a second by Heather, and we'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
No.
Andy?
Yes.
And Brody?
Yes.
All right, that is approved or recommended to the city council with a 4-1 vote. And then we'll move on to item 5.4, which is consideration recommendation regarding the Auto Mall Master Development Agreement for the AMSD area. And I'm going to look at the staff. Is there any additional information you want to share here?
You got it all.
All right.
That was a one-show pony.
Then the applicant, is there any additional information you want to share here? All right, then we'll open the public hearing for this specific area in this. This is the AMSD. All right, then we will close the public hearing at this time. and turn to Planning Commission. I'll let you rebuttal, Bruce.
Yeah, see, there's your rebuttal right there.
You are okay. We'll look for a motion, additional discussion on this item.
I don't think there was anything specific on this one, right?
I think
That
with the
as we were
signage, it was
discussing.
clarified on the last one. And that was the big one for me of where that was going based on
Yeah.
Forrest's comments.
Yeah.
And then past that, screen requirement was already taken care of.
Yeah.
Landscaping's not as relevant. I actually prefer the landscaping with the distance with these. And then accessory use has been clarified. So I'm not sure if there's much more, at least from my perspective on this one.
I agree.
This,
I don't
this,
have.
is this the one that, I'm sorry, because there's
No, this is.
five of them.
Yeah, this is the main one.
So is this the one that reduces the
I'll pull the map up and show you.
Right there,
It's
that's
on
the
page
red.
2.
the clearance from right of way to 5 foot instead of
Yeah.
the 15 or whatever it was?
Next to Mountain View.
Yeah, next to Mountain View.
Yeah.
So, okay,
So my only concern on that is that.
right here.
It's this one right here.
Yeah.
It's this one.
Right. No, but I mean, in the actual MDA.
Yeah, let's
it's-
let's just scan through these again, the slides. So this is the first slide that you presented, right? Because there was one, I think I know what you're talking about. Keep going, there was another, maybe it was the next slide.
So I think that you might be, so
You
there
may
were
be-
some requirements of the Amsd zone that were amended that changed those setbacks.
Right.
And that applies to anywhere the Amsd zone uses are applied. So it could be in the
That could be all-
Amsd,
any one of the 4
right.
or 3, whatever it is. I guess it's 4.
Four.
Different. So I guess my concern is if you change the setback to 3 feet off of the right of way on Mountain View corridor, I mean, that's pretty dang close.
Is the setback, that's for the buildings or is for the?
landscape, wasn't it?
That's for the landscaping.
Let's,
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify on that one a bit. The right-of-way for Mountain View is about 15 to 16 feet off the back of sidewalk. So when we were measuring
How
it,
far
if
is
you
that
go
sidewalk?
5 feet, you'll be about, from the travel lane edge, you'll be about 50 feet all along.
Okay.
So
so there's already
I was
a
just trying to
buffer.
make sure it
right-of-way
wasn't
there.
like right at the sidewalk edge.
When I read that, I thought the same
I
thing,
was
so
concerned
just thought
too.
we'd clarify. It's quite a ways away from actually.
There's already
edge
a
of
buffer
asphalt.
Yeah.
from the
Okay.
sidewalk.
No, that was my question.
Any other questions on this item?
I
Thank
feel
you.
good about this one.
You what, Brody?
I said I feel comfortable with this one.
Okay.
That's almost a motion.
Then we'll look for a motion, Brody. Any motion to be made?
So we're on 5.4.
5.4.
Yeah.
I'll make a recommendation to City Council to approve item 5.4.
No,
What's that? Oh, yeah, with staff's recommendations.
I guess there was some recommendations there, yeah. I'll second.
We'll call for a vote. Brody?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Forrest? Heather?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Item 5.5, and this one is north of Miller Crossing, so just north of this last property. And I don't know if you can do this, but it might be helpful if we pull up, it is page 285 that shows all 4 of these. In the packet that was given out, it just shows all 4 of the properties on a map. Makes it a little bit easier for
I
everyone.
think it's the third slide in on my presentation, Destiny.
Yeah, it's like a purple, red, green, and blue. We color coordinated it.
There you go.
And so, city staff, any additional comments? Developer, any additional comments on this one? All right, then we'll open the public hearing at this time for the north of Miller Crossing, I guess. And we'll close the public hearing at this time and look at Planning Commission for additional comments or a motion to be made.
I don't have any comments. Sounds like nobody else does either. I'll go ahead and make a motion that we recommend approval of item 5.5 to the city council with staff's recommendations.
I'll second.
Motion made by Andy, a second by Heather. We'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And Brody?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Now, item 5.6, which is the Crescent parcel. City staff? Developer? All right, then we'll open the public hearing at this time. And thank you for your patience.
Have other neighbors that couldn't make it tonight, so could I do 5 minutes?
I'm okay with that tonight.
I live my name is Andrew Lawrence. I live on Iron King Drive, right behind bordering the Crescent property. And for the record, I was for residential, but just not how they had done it before. So, but a part of when we had discussions and things about if it was going to be residential or not, that was part of his deal was he was going to take the berm and move it over to the auto mall for Phil. That was kind of how it was kind of presented to us is that, well, if you guys don't support this, then we're just going to build right on top of it. And so that's sad to see that that's what they're basically going to do. I did get the reports from the city that they had, and then I also had some soil reports the developer sent me. And there were levels that were higher than the commercial settings and things. And then I did reach out to the EPA and the state toxicologist, and they basically also said that those levels were kind of arbitrary anyways, and that any of those soils should be removed, basically. And then they also said that the Utah Department of Environmental Response and Remediation is supposed to be involved, and I didn't hear the city guy mention that. So to be fair though, we are supportive of, Mayor Palmer has been talking to us that there's a boat dealership that wants to come in, and then he wants to use that Crescent piece as storage for boats and things like that. I would kind of argue that some of the other things mentioned, like the dealerships and things like that, aren't a good fit for that triangle piece. And if we have a deal with this boat guy, I would recommend either making the MDA just for storage and not those other things. And if that doesn't go through, then can evaluate it. Or if all of these things are listed as changes that they want to make in the MDA, they're basically rezoning it to AutoZone instead of C2. But then this just makes it so they don't have to go through the steps. Like we didn't have like a city meeting to rezone or anything like that. So I would probably recommend to officially rezone it if they want to be able to do all of those kinds of things. And then I looked through the MDA draft that they had and talked to some other people and things, and there was some questions about because there's supposed to be a buffer between C2 and our properties, and basically if they're keeping the berm, I'm not sure how they will support those things like the wall and things like that. Is the wall going to go on top of the berm now, or how is that going to be, or is it going to create like a channel, which I know that the city doesn't like to do, where there's a fence and a fence and then there's a draft area in between kind of thing. So, but basically I think I mean for myself and some of the neighbors we've talked to are supportive of a storage area, but that was always been the thing to get rid of that berm. It's been a thing we've lived next to that's been a thing that we've been concerned about and we haven't wanted next to us, and that was kind of always the promise. And when they first came in and said, oh, we're going to take that soil and move it over to the auto mall, that sounded like a solution to this kind of thing. So, and I know that was negotiated in the price that they're under contract to buy from the city. So if you're not going to still have them remove the soil. I think, I don't know if you should change the price, or I don't know what you should do with that, but I would probably recommend to remove all the soil to street level and comply with either taking away all the other usage besides storage, or having them actually rezone that area. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if you were this one or the next one.
My name is Philip Bates. I also live right by the Crescent plot there. The biggest concern is, as my house sits currently, I literally see, 20 feet of soil already. And obviously, it's concerning to me as a resident there that only as far as I need to. That comment kind of just sounded like it was, there's not enough clarity in that as far as, I don't care what they build there as far as commercial. If they want to go with the car lots or whatever, that's fine. It's just the biggest concern is, if you have already a 20-foot high hill, and then you're building a cinder block wall up on top of that, that's going to be an eyesore for me, regardless of trees being planted there or not. Obviously, it's just, we have to live there. This is our life. This is where I live. This is where I want to live. As a developer, I would like to see that they would be willing to kind of think of that in the aspects of it, rather than just looking at it as purely just, we're going to get them back because they didn't want our real estate or they didn't want our residential. Obviously, that berm is the biggest issue. Bringing that down to street level, that's going to be the biggest concern for any one of my neighbors that I've talked to. That's their biggest concern, because if you put a dealership on top of that and then they're already requesting higher lighting, that's going to put those lights 50 feet in the air. There's no chance of it not getting in my backyard, quote unquote, as they say they have their light recommendations. There's no way. Obviously, that's going to be shining right in my bedroom window, and that's going to be an inconvenience for us as citizens. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll close the public hearing, and if Bruce has any comments.
Thank you. Just very, very briefly, the contaminated soils, I think we've already talked about it. I do want to respond that the limits are not arbitrary. They're set by experts, and they're agreed to by the city for safety and agreed to by EPA. I think they're far and away from not arbitrary. They're very, very, very specific as to what they are. There were some ranges that were allowed, but they weren't just pulled out of the sky. The second question about, quote, rezoning, the state law specifically allows modifications to zoning issues for particular pieces of property precisely by going through the master development agreement process. There's a section, is it 523, 109A 523, that specifically provides for doing exactly what we're doing with this exact notice procedure and this exact public hearing procedure. So we're not doing anything inappropriate or backhanded, and we don't need to, and frankly, it would be the exact same thing we've already done with the same hearing in front of the Planning Commission, the same hearing in front of the City Council. It would have the exact same net effect of doing this. As it relates to back to the contaminated soils, there's no requirement that you can't develop on property in its existing condition, and you have to take it down to, quote, street level, whatever that might be, in order to clean it up. To the extent that it complies with state law and city ordinance, we would be entitled to put, as it sits now, the most intrusive C2 use on there without any of the screening and without any of the limitations that we are proposing. So essentially, what we are proposing, as I said before, and I'll try not to repeat myself again, is better for the neighborhood than the currently existing C2 zone. And other than that, I don't have anything else to say unless you have any questions. Thank you very much.
I have a question, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things that they brought up was the buffer, which is required, right, in the C2. So the neighbors probably have fences already.
It's a vinyl fence right now.
Yeah, it's required to have a
double-
precast wall.
Yeah.
It's required to have a precast wall.
So would that be on
Oh,
top?
I see.
or
This is
would
this
it
that
be-
gap issue, the little canyon of.
So we just barely at the 7-Eleven had the same issue. They all had existing fences. The precast wall was still required to put in because of it.
Yeah.
Which actually, as you drive by now, you see some of those yards have 2 more feet behind their fence. That's part of their yard now. And so it's,
Because they're not allowed to have 2 fences.
Right.
So the vinyl fence would have to be removed, and the
precast
the
one.
precast one.
And so
would
there
have to go
is,
in place.
there is, that is something that the developer works with the landowners on how they do that, and then the city gets involved. But our only requirement is that they do have to put the precast wall in as a city.
We're just complying with the city's code.
Yep, as that is code.
And you're right, it is weird. I've had that happen more
Yep,
than
the double
once. Where you have
fences.
2
But,
fences right
but
between-
with it all being said, I have definitely seen in other areas, a regular vinyl fence that is along a commercial unit does get bashed in more often than not. So the precast wall is definitely something that is good to have.
Do you-
yes, ma'am.
Sorry, do you have any idea of how much you're taking it down? I think the.
I don't. I honestly
Okay.
don't, because I just haven't done the studies, and I don't know what it's gonna, I don't know whether it's gonna come down a foot or 5 feet or 10 feet. It's gonna come down, whatever it takes to do 2 things. One, get rid of any contaminated soils to the level that's required by the so-called ROD, the Record of Decision. And 2, get it down and/or engineer fill it back up, however, so that it's geotechnically, geologically, whatever it is. I would get confused between geology and geotechnical. because
Geotechnical.
The geologists hate it if you say geotechnical, and the geotechs hate it if you say geology.
That's
So
right.
this would be a geotech. So we'll have to take it down and recompact it as necessary, and I don't know how much that is.
And that's a fair answer, because it could be the entire berm, it could be a couple feet of the berm.
And I don't know.
And I think the only thing that hopefully we make as a recommendation is that you as a developer works with the community and the city council the best way you can to make it an area that looks nice and is usable.
And that's
and
why
is
we're
done
happy
well.
to do the screening that you required, and I think that makes sense. I thought that was a good idea, and we all agreed that that's a good idea.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, I'll turn to the Planning Commission for additional discussion. This is a tough piece of property with how it's designed right now, what it is.
Yeah, I'm okay with what they're doing. I think it is currently Zone C2, and I think the restrictions that they're placing on themselves is actually, like he mentioned, a C2 plus. It's a little bit better than, there's a lot of other uses that could come in that they're prohibiting, which I think is a good thing. My main concern is the elevation that is out there with that existing material. I would like to see that down to street level at a minimum, but apparently we can't require that at all with this motion. So
Is the property still owned by the city?
They're in
Contract?
contract, I think, or something like that. But I think regardless, it comes down to, we can make a recommendation for the city council to work with them and try to get it to a level that works the best for that area and the homes around it. Obviously, they're going to put the precast wall in because that's ordinance, but past that, we need to stick to what the ordinances are and what the requirements are that we can have, and then based on the master development agreement, what is being put in place, what we can do there. So.
Yeah, it's my main concern.
And it's a recommendation.
The elevation of the contaminated soils.
Because we can recommend that they take it all the way down, but at the same time, the city council is going to
Council makes
decide
the
what they're going to
final.
do.
Yeah.
So.
This is recommendation. That's exactly right.
That's what it is.
Yeah, for me, I like the additional uses. gives them more flexibility to, I
Well, I
guess,
think
put
it-
it out there to the market and get what should go there.
But what they're providing or recommending is not different than the C2, right? They're restricting some of the
They're
uses.
restricting the C2 and
Some of the
adding,
C2,
adding
yeah.
some of the AMSDs.
And, I'm with you, but you're right, in the AMSD. Yeah, I concur.
Yeah, I think as commercial property and what they're recommending in that, I'm okay with. It just comes down to that berm.
Yeah.
And I think we come to a recommendation to the city council on trying their best to mitigate that and reduce it. And for all we know, though, that entire berm might be gone because it might all be impacted soil. We don't know, and neither does the developer until it
And
happens.
all that material was brought in because it was impacted, so hopefully it is all contaminated, they can just get rid of it.
But we don't hope that for the developer. But
We don't hope that for the developer. We hope that for our citizens, though.
We do. We hope that it works out best for both parties.
Good point.
Well, isn't there still a need to move some of that soil over to the AMSD site?
I'm sure there's.
Yeah, but I don't think that's relevant to this.
Yeah.
They can move it anywhere they wanted, so. As long as it's taken care of from the impacted soil, that's proper words, right? Impacted.
Yeah.
And so, all right. Additional discussion on this one,
I
though.
have a question maybe for the city. For this lot, or this area, this property, Crescent, is it basically the C2 with slight adjustments? Or is it C2 with adjustments and the AMSD on top? Or the master,
The MDA, is it providing?
Is it changing, like, for instance, the landscaping requirements, the parking requirements, the setbacks, the signage? Is that on top of just the small tweaks to the C2? Or is it just the small tweaks to C2 that we're discussing now?
So in the MDA, all that I can understand that was changing is the addition of uses, but if it does develop under an AMSD use, the AMSD standards do apply. So things that might change with that, for example, is if they pick a use from the Amsd zone that's permitted, then it would not come back through Planning Commission for approval because it would go through that AMSD process. If it was a use, a commercial use that is allowed in the C2, if it's over an acre, then it does come back to the Planning Commission for consideration. And that gives us a little more ability to potentially mitigate some of the negative effects of development. It's impossible, or it's very difficult, I would say, to be able to deny an application. You'd have to prove equivocally that the negative effects it's impossible to mitigate them, which I think is a really uphill climb for us legally. But we could impose some additional, buffering restrictions. I don't know that we probably couldn't restrict anything that the zone allows in terms of height or something like that.
Right. And the reason that I ask this is because the Crescent and the garden plots, which we'll talk about next time, are totally different situations than the AMSD in the north of Miller Crossing, because these ones, yes, car dealerships galore, no one's going to walk near them. And I think that was his comment, was this is not going to be a walkable area, or people aren't going to be walking near it. This is in the middle of schools and buildings and families and residences. And so I think that we need to kind of keep that in consideration, that these lots need to be treated more pedestrian-friendly and less car-centric, auto mall, that sort of thing.
And just remind me, the one across the street is commercial and the one next to it is commercial as well, on the corner. Those are both commercial, is that correct?
From
Are you
where?
talking
Crescent.
about these little ones?
Yeah, so the
That
little
one on
one
the corner,
across
that one
from it, and
Yeah,
then
that corner's
That's a church
commercial.
here.
that's a church with a daycare, and the one next to it's probably going to be a gas
Church
station.
with
That
the
1
daycare
acre
is-
is
The church with the daycare is
C2.
further down.
Yeah,
That
it's
one
further
is
down.
all
It's the long
residential.
one, I
Oh,
think.
it's down here, sorry.
But this
You're
is
right.
commercial. No, this is a retention basin.
That's a retention basin.
Retention
That could
park.
become commercial.
Right.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's definitely
make
going to be
sure.
walkability going down that street. We don't want to just turn Herman Boulevard into.
Well, this
Well,
is
it's
walked
already
on a regular
has-
basis.
Yeah, I was
This
I
is-
gonna
know,
say-
that's my point, is like, along Crescent, that's a main thoroughfare for the kids to get to the school. I think that was the conversation we had when they first came with the housing, was they're gonna put a path back there. And so I'm just trying to make sure that we keep that in mind, and that if, you know,
Wouldn't we just make a recommendation to have,
Well-
like standard, our city's sign standard for that?
because like 3 foot off of the setback.
So I got a
But with
question.
with the
If they go
precast,
AMSD on that, yeah.
but with the 3-foot precast, or excuse me, the 6-foot precast walls along
About
there,
the front-
you're not
frontage.
gonna have the pedestrians cutting through the property. Is that what you're concerned?
Well, I'm just saying that this is more of a walkable area than this area. I can understand this, you're not gonna be walking up and down.
So I mean, there is a sidewalk that goes all
But
along
yeah,
it right now.
there already is that existing, exactly, that was
But
my
what I'm
point.
saying is we need to treat it as a pedestrian area as well. We can't just say, okay, you know, 3 feet off of the,
Well, and
off of
there's-
the property line, you can
And there's
build.
the tree requirements and stuff that's required along
Unrestricted
Harriman Park.
BMW, 80 foot tall. That's,
So this is one thing that I notice, and I could be wrong, but the traffic that typically is around dealerships is not as much as you think. And if this is a storage, it's even less.
Sure.
And so I think it's actually very conducive for this area because they will have the sidewalk. And right now, that's where they
already
walk.
there.
Nobody cuts through this area because it doesn't make any sense to cut through anywhere unless somebody jumps their neighborhood fence.
Right.
And so it's very little traffic that ever goes in this Crescent area.
right, but what I'm saying though is I'm not talking vehicular traffic, I'm talking about pedestrian traffic.
I am too.
Because I see people walking up and down here all the time.
They do on the sidewalk, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
correct.
so we need to keep that in mind. And this area here, what we passed over here, is very anti-pedestrian.
Yeah.
Having
Well,
great
I'm
trees
just,
far
I'm just
apart,
saying that I
having-
believe that this is a valid or good use that potentially will be good for walking
I
still.
agree. And my only
I think-
concern is we need to maintain that.
Yeah, I think Forrest,
Pedestrian friendly.
Clint's got a comment. Let's let Clint make a
So
comment.
one of the requirements, so something that the Amsd zone does is allows the tree spacing to be 60 feet on center.
Right.
And in our proposal, and our recommendation, we're saying that that can only take place on the auto row
On the
drive or
Harriman
whatever it
Main
is.
Street.
Everywhere else, so the Crescent, the garden plots, on the street frontage where North Miller Crossing is, Harriman Main Street, all of those street frontages should still maintain the 30-foot spacing
yeah.
of street trees
Which would
on
be
center,
nice.
right? So that's basically just maintaining the existing standard for pedestrians.
Right.
I mean, so there's already a sidewalk there, there's not street trees there on the Crescent piece. So you will have, whatever's provided on site, they'll still have an
But
ADA.
actually improve it.
They'll
with
still
the
have an
treescape
ADA
and
access,
stuff.
right.
And
So
provide
they'll-
that buffer.
Right.
And I think that's the goal. The goal is to improve it and to make that, you know,
Yeah, I think one thing we want to make sure on the Crescent piece is to put a height restriction.
Is what?
Height restriction.
on that parcel.
Well, just 'cause-
With buildings.
Building height.
Yeah, the
Building height.
And maybe, maybe that's, or building height in relation to street level.
Yeah.
well,
Maybe that's the
same.
recommendation.
That's the issue. Are you adding, let's say they just take off 2 feet.
I think you have to reflect on what we can and can't do.
Right.
Again, it's a
Well, it's
recommendation.
just a
though.
recommendation, right?
Just like and maybe that's a part of the recommendation.
And I think we just
require
said we recommend a height
a
limit on this
height limit
property.
on this property from
From
And
street
just
level
leave it at
to-
a height limit because of the homes behind it.
and not, well, and that's probably fine.
Yeah, behind it,
I
around it.
mean, make a recommendation to take this contaminated soils down to street level and.
Well, but again, if you
It's just a
It can't be a recommendation, this is a master development agreement, so we can't make the recommendation of something like that, but in the end, it's the city council that will decide yes or
Yeah,
no.
exactly.
that's right.
So,
So maybe the answer is we recommend they work with the developer to reduce as much as possible the
to limit the
abatement that's
impact on the
there,
residents.
and then also put in some type of height requirements that will not be, that'll more conducive to privacy for the adjacent residents.
And we did talk about the screening, we talked about the trees.
That's
And
all
so
standard.
that
That's
are
already
some.
in there, though,
That
right?
are some that we're hoping will help.
Yeah. Right. I would like to make a motion that we approve item, or recommend approval of item 5.6 with staff's recommendations, with 2 additional recommendations that the city work with the developer to reduce as much as possible the embankment that is out there, and also provide some height restrictions for the development so as to be more conducive for the privacy of the adjacent residents there.
Motion made by Andy.
I'll second that.
A second by Brody. We'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Brody?
Yes.
That was a lot of yeses for really, really quiet on that second.
I know, right?
We were just processing what he was saying.
All right. We'll move on to item 5.7, consideration and recommendation regarding the Auto Mall Master Development Agreement for a garden plot. This is on for a public hearing. Anything else from staff? Anything else from the developer? Nope. Then we'll open the public hearing at this time for the garden plot. And we'll close the public hearing at this time for the garden plot, and we will move on to discussion from the Planning Commission. For me, the biggest thing is just making sure that we protect the residents on the north side the best we can, and the only thing that I can think of that mitigates that was the trees that we already spoke about.
Yeah. The other thing that was mentioned, I know this, right, the city, the staff recommended a 60-foot maximum height, right? Was that right? But then the developer was saying not to have a restriction? I don't know what people's thoughts are on that.
I tend to agree with that because I think if you put it 90 feet away or 60 feet away, I mean, we already have a requirement on that. And so I am not as worried about the height of going 90 feet. Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think a hotel is going to actually.
Yeah, what would be a 90-foot, how many stories in it? Is it 9 stories, right, roughly?
8 or something.
8, maybe 8, right.
So, I mean, I'm not sure that would happen.
A 60 would accommodate a 4 or 5 story.
And so,
Okay.
so I'm not as worried about the height requirement because it pushes it farther away from the homes with our current requirement. And I'm not sure really 60 to 90 feet. It's still the top floors are going to be looking down. I think the only way to mitigate that is trees, period.
Yeah.
So,
but staff's recommendation was the 60-foot, right? Do we want to go ahead and stay with that, or do we want to?
I think just with whatever we say we'll go with staff recommendation, but are not as concerned if that's your opinion.
Well, like the developer
of
said,
the height.
the higher, the better quality.
Yeah,
that's kind of what you see.
Yeah. What's going to dictate that is going to be when they do their feasibility study with how many rooms they can keep filled around here. That's really what's going to dictate it. So.
Yeah, I think market will dictate that.
Yeah, agreed.
Just letting you know.
So I'm okay with eliminating that height requirement as long as they provide this, well, it's there. They already got the offset, setback.
They're going to start timing you.
Oh, they're going to time me. Any other thoughts? Anybody else have any concerns on height?
I agree with that. I agree with that in this case.
Okay, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we recommend approval of item 5.7 with staff's recommendations with the modification to the one recommendation that we don't necessarily restrict the height on this parcel.
But we keep the city requirement of going the
But keep the city requirements for the distance based on the setback, right? The 15-foot min plus the one additional over 15. We keep that, but not limit it to the 60-foot. But I guess it is in there. Maximum height of 60 foot, but can increase with 90 with PC approval. Maybe we just leave it alone then. Sorry, that's the recommendation.
I'm just saying. I'm not sure if it matters if it comes back. If you just. If they go 90 foot.
They're okay. It doesn't have to come back. Okay, so.
Not if you say it's okay, and they agree from a council perspective.
Yeah. All right. Let me redo that motion. All right. So recommend approval of item 5.7. For the garden plot with staff's recommendation, and it does not necessarily need to come back to Planning Commission for approval if it is over 60 feet.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Andy, a second by Heather, and we'll call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And Brody?
Yes.
All right, guys.
Thank you all very much.
Thank
guys.
you.
I think we've made it through a couple MDAs today.
Just a few.
So we'll look for additional comments from the Planning Commission.
Can I request that we maybe look at a dark sky ordinance?
Yeah, we do have a dark sky ordinance of some sort in Harriman City, but do you think maybe on one of the work meetings we could review that? Just for reference to see if there's any modifications we may or may not want to make in that?
Blake would love to do that for us, so.
I want to bring something up that we're working on. I don't know if you noticed a little while ago, we had 3 different streetlight heads out in front of City Hall. And the heads we have glass and the light kind of shines out. The new heads have LEDs in the top that shine down. And they kind of contribute to this. I don't know, it's not part of the we don't have a dark sky ordinance, but we're changing our light
I
standard.
thought we did have something just with,
We have some regulations on how many candle feet you can have at the property line and things like that. But we are changing this light fixture to help with light pollution. So it should help, and I think we're starting to implement it around in new development. So
okay.
just want to bring that up.
Sounds great. And one of the step lights is out when you walk down.
So earlier in our meeting, it was brought up about helipads, the helicopter pads. Is that something that we need to write into our ordinance?
No, that's a major variance
The
if they want to do
helicopter
it.
pads?
Helipads.
No, we're good.
Did I say it wrong?
Hell
We're
pads.
good.
Yeah.
I mean,
He
I
wants
don't know
two.
that I would want my neighbor landing their plane.
We already have some type of ordinance that addresses that, right? That's why they
I
wanted
don't
a
think,
variance.
I don't know.
Do we?
The interpretation that we made is that they're not allowed in the city through a zoning amendment to.
Because I think state law says that helicopters can land anywhere.
So the language in our ordinance says that any use that is customarily associated with a primary use. So helipad landings are not a customary, or not customarily associated with a single-family home. So that was the route that we took. So
Yet.
Could
Good
that
job
be
with wording.
argued?
There's
right?
quads.
I think we're okay. Any other comments, guys?
Do we want to revisit with city council potentially MDAs?
In what way? Oh, gosh. What way, Heather? Like, what are you thinking
I'm just
specifically?
thinking, like, when we're looking over these, like, is everything that we put in an MDA necessary? Like, can we just put the things that are different from our code in that MDA rather than having,
That is the
a
intent,
few
right?
hundred pages?
Yeah.
I think it comes down to, because we're working with the developer wants a few hundred pages of language as well on top of it.
And it's negotiated.
I think that's the part that makes it tricky.
Yeah.
How can we make this easier,
Sometime
Todd?
With MDAs generally, so Harriman has abnormally long MDAs.
I agree.
Yeah.
I've read them.
But it doesn't mean that what's in them is inappropriate. So typically what we do is we codify the code at the time in the MDA. So that way, when we go back in time, when they submit an application 5 years later, and it's not addressed in the actual agreement, that we can look at the code that was in place at the time. So that way, because that's what they vest in, and
Yeah.
we want to make sure that that has happened. Typically, what I do with the agreements that I've written is I only copy the code that's applicable for the change. So let's say, for example, that there's a residential development and they want to deviate it from to R110. So I only copy the R110 in the zone or any other applicable zone, but I don't copy the entire zone. And I think that's happened at least with the MDAs that I've seen. So we're trying to narrow it down, and Bruce and I actually worked on the template for these agreements, and we pared it down significantly from the previous template that was used, several pages, and so we're trying to do what we can to narrow it down.
This
but-
did look shorter, actually, than some previous MDAs I've seen.
But that was actually a big back and forth was the exhibits. And originally what they did is they had red lines on all the exhibits on what they were technically deviating from. And we went back and said, this is too cumbersome to read because you have the text amendment going on, and then you have these other deviations that you want to do for the crescent. And so we just said, just put what you want in there that's going to be different. And then we'll attach once we know what the vested code is at the time after that agreement is passed.
Are we getting what we want out of these MDAs? Are we benefiting? That's where I struggle with the MDAs, is I don't always see that.
At least with the commercial, it's easier for me than some of the residentials we've seen in the past. And I'm going to answer my opinion on this because they've came a long way. These commercials at least give an economic benefit to the city versus some of these residentials have been, we'll give you the minimum, we want everything. And that's what it has felt like. And so it's been tough with but granted, some of these are before my time when we saw. That allowed them to buy whatever land they wanted and put it into their MDA, and it's the same thing. And there were a lot of things that were a little bit different before we got here. I'm seeing a steady increase in benefit to the city, but it definitely has been tough with a couple of them in the past.
I think the Teton commercial MDA, I think that went from bad to better.
I hope we were good at the end of it.
Yeah, I think, it gives some options.
Yeah.
For more pedestrian style development to take place that wouldn't have been available in a C2 zone. So, that's one off the top of my head that I can think of where we maybe benefited.
Is that something we need to address then, is pedestrian access in C2 zones? Or how do we solve that problem?
So the reason that one came up specifically is because, the former general plan called that out as just commercial and didn't give a whole lot of detail on what should take place in commercial. In our current plan that we just adopted, that area is called out as neighborhood commercial, which asks for, or that, it pushes for more residential style development to take place. And so that's why we, as a staff, kind of pushed the developer to provide those types of provisions.
So is that something, though, that we want to standardize with what we have left in our city and create something that's pedestrian friendly everywhere?
I think that
Just throw it into the code?
And you could determine that as appropriate, where maybe the auto mall, you wouldn't want a huge pedestrian amenity, but in other areas you would.
Over here. Yeah. Yeah, the MDA is always, that's why even in this meeting prior, it was a little bit hard because it's like, we know how important they are, but at the same time, the balance, and it's hard, and it's also to the council. So it's almost like, if we're really just making recommendations, what is the council looking at for this body to help provide to? If all we're doing is making recommendations, are they looking for certain things? Or is it really because every once in a while I feel like, okay, are we making this longer than it needs to because really the council only wants to have us touch on these 5 items? Does that make sense? And that's why, and I guess Heather saying revisit it with the council, maybe that's a question to ask. Like when an MDA goes to the planning commission, what are you looking for the planning commission to help provide?
So I'll say this. I think that more heads obviously make a better project, right?
I agree.
I think that your position as a planning commission, they have different parameters that they kind of make decisions on because they're an elected body. You're an appointed body, so you don't have to, you don't answer to the voters, and maybe the budget isn't as much of a concern for the planning commission as it might be the city council. They're looking at different things than you are, but I think in your purview as a planning commission, I think it's entirely inappropriate for you to look at land use and how
how different types of elements of a development will affect the community. The planned community, the built development, right, the built environment. So, if you see something that you think would be beneficial, I don't think it's harmful to make a recommendation. And like you said, like we mentioned before, though, I think making those in the correct, allotment, where you have I think Jordan referred to it as a ceiling and a floor, working within those parameters, making recommendations within those parameters, not making like for example, with the crescent piece, I don't think it would be appropriate to say you got to remove 20 feet of top fill so that site comes down.
I think it's more like 50, but okay.
I don't think that would be in our parameters to
I
make
agree.
a recommendation on, but providing reasonable type of recommendations that would help buffer situations or create a better development, I think is something that is.
Yeah, and I think in that case, it's really to work with the council, the developer, and the community on how do we best mitigate this, because it could literally have a building that looks like it's 20 feet above a house.
Yeah.
And so.
This could be a good, maybe a joint meeting discussion, because this is really more of a value-laden question, right? What are we really trying to achieve here? Is it working? Do we need to adjust maybe our process or policy that directs staff on how do we respond to requests to enter into a development agreement discussion or negotiation? So there's probably a number of things that we could revisit, but obviously this is something that needs to be a conversation probably with the council as well, and not just with staff.
Or is it something that we need to codify some of these things like walkability or connectivity, because like they said in our training, we can't really say, okay, you need to have better connectivity if the city's code does not require that or define that or codify it.
Well,
and
then if we say we really want to achieve that value,
right,
but then we minimize it through
MDAs.
Yeah, and
Hey,
MDAs.
it's like, well, why are we doing it? Yeah.
Right.
I like what Forrest brought up, because then we're not having to try to fight for it back. We already have it.
That's the thing, is I think it would help with our negotiations with some of these, because we're saying this is our, you have to provide walkability. That's what you have to do. So then they'll come to us for other things, and we don't have to fight for walkability.
Right, because it'd already be part of the code.
Right? So I'm just maybe as a tool of negotiation.
Right.
Sorry, I know it's late, guys, and everyone's ready.
Well, let me look at this. I forgot to close it, and I threw mine away now. So future meetings, next city council Wednesday, September 14th, next planning commission meeting Thursday, September 15th, and next city council meeting Wednesday, September 28th. Could I look for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, sorry.
Chris, you're here in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I'm not going out of town. If I'm around.
There's a good chance
This
I will
conference
not
is
be
no
here,
longer
so-
being.
Yeah, I know, Andrea did the motion to adjourn, right?
Who was that?
Who was it? Oh, it was Heather.
Heather.
All right.
Heather did.
Yeah, probably 80% chance